across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the home of common sense. Thank you to Julia. She's back on Monday right here on Talk. Lots to come this afternoon. We are going to tuck into that. I just think it's irresistible. Nigel Farage issuing a brutal slapdown to Robert Jenrick's suggestion of a Tory-Reform Coalition to take down Labour, saying his party would be revolted by the mere idea. Not mixing his words. By the way, Nige, love you to bits. Don't believe a word of it. Details to come. Hospitals are being accused of defying the Supreme Court ruling that trans women are not legally women, with London Marathon organisers also allowing trans runners to compete as women. These people are literally mad. Quite literally mad, particularly on something like a big long running race where if ever there was obvious physical distinctions, it is there, right? We'll have more on that story. And playing loud music on public transport, as you've been hearing with Julia, should be illegal according to the Lib Dems. They've come out with a policy we can all get behind. There's no one on planet Earth that would disagree with them. They're calling for fines of up to £1,000 for offenders. I'd add in a big fat custard pie in the fizzog into the equation as well. Details on that as well. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. Now, we have been here before, of course, in talking about this potential pact between Reform UK and the Conservatives. Now, it's one of those interesting points about living in the 21st century, living in the current era where politics is in a very different place from anywhere it's been in the past. The divides, the entrenched opinions, the immovable ideas and appetites of individuals and focus groups and God knows what else. There's a lot going on out there. There's a big old soup of choices and ideas and initiatives and individuals and who is the best. But is that the best? Would they make a better prime minister? Anybody might make a better prime minister than what we currently have, etc. But this one has been hanging around for a bit. It would have been unthinkable, however, that we would be discussing a party that's only been formed for about half an hour and has 5 MPs, that they might form the next government. I doubt whether there's, unless you go to some really dicey place on planet Earth, there's probably very few areas anywhere that would be able to announce that that is the current state of play. We've had places get close. I'm always reminded of Marine Le Pen in France, where, the last few elections, she's kind of been hot on the heels of, and then at the last hurdle, it's all kind of fallen apart. There's sort of examples like that. UKIP 2015, remember, they polled really well. I know there were sort of Conservative agreements that followed that. Never into any sort of Westminster success. It was always the line I use, UKIP done very, very well, but never been able to transpose that into Westminster success. Now, of course, that is changing, and now we're talking about the very real possibility of a merger between the Conservatives and Reform UK. Robert Jenrick has pledged to unite the right against Sir Keir Starmer. It was a private meeting, not that private, we're talking about it, of the Tories. The private meeting said the Tories and Reform must not be fighting each other for votes at the next election. Now, these comments are seen largely as the kind of first base moment of opening the big door to some kind of agreement in whatever form. Mr. Jenrick says this, because he has to say this. He says, the nightmare scenario was the Conservatives going into the next election with the two parties being disunited. Nigel Farage insisted, as I said at the beginning, that the idea would revolt members of Reform. They would be revolted by a pact between Reform UK and the Tories. He said, Mr. Jenrick said he wanted to bring this coalition together and try one way or another to make sure divisions between Reform and the Tories did not hand a second term in office to Starmer in the process. Now, I sense, and I don't think I'm, reinventing the wheel on saying this, but he's absolutely right, isn't he? If you split the right-wing vote, income Labour. Despite those impressive opinion polls for Reform and Mr Farage, it would be extraordinary if Reform UK simply walked into the 2029 election and won it and became the government and therefore Mr Farage the Prime Minister. Nothing's impossible. As I said at the beginning, we live in interesting times, but I mean massively unlikely, even based on the favourable polling results that Reform have seen of late. What could happen, however, is that some kind of agreement between the two parties might result in Labour being defeated. We've got a long time between now and 2029, but things go fast. What should it look like? How would you support? And I'm asking you this question predominantly if you're a Reform UK supporter or a Conservative supporter. Would you support a pact between the two parties? 0344 499 1000. So Kemi Badenoch said, I think something on the, I'm paraphrasing here, it's her job to essentially eliminate Nigel Farage. Mr Jenrick doesn't, in his heart doesn't like the idea, but, needs must. Mr Farage using words like, we're revolted by this. So at the moment, both parties have to pretend they don't really want it, but both parties secretly know they probably have to do it in some form or another. Doesn't mean to say they unite and reform and form one kind of shadow cabinet, but it might mean that they cherry pick where they stand candidates so they don't split the right-wing vote, etc. Could be that. Whatever form it takes, I speak to you as either a Conservative voter or a former Conservative voter, or now a Reform UK voter, or someone who is just looking around that area of the political spectrum and thinking, well, it's one of these. Would you support a pact between the two? 0344 499 1000. And I think that question is particularly interesting in terms of responses, particularly interesting for those who left the Conservatives. It was quite a lot. They left the Conservatives and became Reform UK members, people who looked at the Tories and said, never again. Would you hold your nose and swallow that pride and go, do you know what, for the greater good, as you see it, I'm going to go for it. Yeah, let's have it. Let's have some kind of pact. Let's have some kind of agreement between the two parties. 0344 499 1000 is where you will find us. We're going to talk about this and the other big stories of the day. Henry Heale is Deputy Editor at Conservative Home. Henry, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Good to have you with us as ever. So let's start on that story. Mr Farage rejecting a Tory-Reform Pact. Robert Jenrick, of course, calling for united voters to challenge Labour. This is a leaked recording where these stories, a leaked in inverted commas recording. Let's have a listen to Mr Jenrick speaking in that leaked audio that Sky got hold of. And it's interesting just the choice of words he uses here. Have a listen.
The right is not united. And then you head towards a general election where the nightmare scenario is that Keir Starmer sailed in through the middle as a result of the two parties being disunited again. I don't know about you, but I'm not prepared for that to happen. I want the right to be united. And so one way or another until it's declared. And to bring this coalition together and make sure we...
Well, that's what he said. That's what a leaked recording sounds like, Henry, of course. Look, I don't think for those of us that cover this or people listening to us that are really interested in this stuff, it seems like a bit of a no-brainer that at some point there will be an agreement in some form.
Yeah, obviously Robert Jenrick, or sources close to Robert Jenrick, I should say, insist that he's talking about building a coalition of centre-right and right-wing voters rather than the parties. But I think now you've played the clip, the context makes that a slightly dubious proposition because he's explicitly talking about circumstances in which the Conservatives have not managed to reunite the sort of right-wing voter coalition behind one party. As for a deal, I think it's probably likely that there will end up being at least an informal pact between the two parties where they deprioritize each other's target seats. They come up with a list. Yeah. There'll be some scrapping at the margins. But basically, I think any seat, based on current polling, any seat where Reform is in second place, the Conservatives could deprioritize it quite safely. But whether or not there's going to be a deal before, I think is a much more open question.
Yeah.
And I think it might be a bad idea because Conservatives and the Reform have different electoral maps. Right? Nearly all, I think all but 9 of Reform UK's second place seats are Labour held. And many of them are constituencies that threw the Tories out just last year.
Yeah.
So if you're Reform and you're trying to capitalise on anger with a Labour government, why are you suddenly turning yourself into the local franchise of the party that these voters just kicked out? You maximise your brand by being distinct. For the Tories, most of their pickup seats are Labour facing. Reform only have 5, or Lib Dem facing, crucially, in the south, in the old Tory heartland. And they've got to be worried about, given the very slender majorities most of their MPs have, well-organised Green or Liberal Democrat campaigns sort of sniping some of them, even if they pick up seats overall. So actually, in terms of maximising the vote for the two parties, it probably makes more sense for them to be discrete and distinct. The real challenge is what happens, and this is where I think Nigel Farage could be really usefully pressed. What happens if, after the election, Reform and the Conservatives have enough MPs between them to turf Sir Keir Starmer out?
Yeah.
Is he still going to abstain? Is he going to keep a Labour government in office because he won't do a deal with the Tories?
Yeah. I mean, I think that answers itself pretty much, to be honest, Henry. But, you know, who knows? Because I was just looking at Mr Farage's Twitter feed. He's posted this afternoon this: Reform UK will introduce a minister for deportations. He said, very simple, succinct line. No one's ever said that in mainstream politics before. Now, of course, that massively appeals to quite a big base of right-wing voters, particularly Reform UK voters. That wouldn't even sound controversial. But there are a lot of, if you might say, traditional Tories that might agree with the sentiment, but sort of disagree with going there, that kind of language. They feel that they'll be in bed with a party that is more sort of Marine Le Pen territory than it is Conservative.
So I think there are 3 sort of broad grounds on which Conservative MPs are wary about doing a deal with Reform. The one, as you just said, is that, you know, Nigel Farage, he's never been a far-right politician. That has been a slander. But he has parties historically have problems with candidate filtering, right? Far-right people are sometimes attracted to those parties, and they're historically, it takes a while to catch them and filter them out. And so there will be that concern, and the concern, of course, that he is simply moving politics more further right than they're comfortable with. The second one is, what is Reform's philosophy? Because, of course, it's very easy when you're in a sort of liberal democratish position, the Lib Dems famously do this, to say all kinds of things. You can say whatever you like. But there are people in Reform UK who are angry ex-Conservatives and want Thatcherite economics, and there's other people in Reform UK who want to target the Red Wall. At some point, presumably, the party is going to have to pick which one of those economic policies it does, but we don't know yet. But then the third one is also just, I guess, for want of a better word, sort of competence. You know, if you're going to be going into government, then it really matters who Reform UK's MPs are. And one of the things that we've been hearing in the aftermath of the Rupert Lowe expulsion is that Reform is having real trouble attracting talented candidates, because why would you go and be a tall poppy, given that you now know what Nigel Farage does to tall poppy? So there are several grounds on which I think the Conservatives would be wary.
It's going to be interesting nonetheless, and as time goes on, when I sense, as we've alluded to in this conversation, Henry, there will be a point where this idea of, you know, it's a revolting idea, we want to eliminate Farage, when all of that will be watered down and kind of got rid of, and both parties will start considering this serious proposal. We're asking that question this afternoon: would you support a proposed pact between Reform UK and the Conservatives? Henry Heale is with us. Let's look at this story, Henry. NHS hospitals trying to defy trans rulings is one of them, and trans runners will be allowed to compete in the London Marathon. This is extraordinary. It's worth reminding ourselves what all of this means in reality, because, of course, there was just last week a Supreme Court ruling on gender. Let's have a reminder of what they said.
The central question on this appeal is the meaning of the terms woman and sex in the Equality Act 2010. Do those terms refer to biological women or biological sex? Or, is a woman to be interpreted as extending to a trans woman with a gender recognition certificate? By that I mean a person born male who now possesses a gender recognition certificate amending her gender to female. The unanimous decision of this court is that the terms woman and sex in the Equality Act 2010 refer to a biological woman and biological sex.
So it's quite clear what the Supreme Court ruled last week, Henry. I'm not quite sure how, whether it's the NHS or anyone else, for that matter, is able to sort of circumnavigate it. You can have agreement between, you know, if you work in a company and they say, right, we're going to have unisex toilets. If everybody's happy, then we let it happen. If they're not, we don't. And everybody says, yeah, I'm happy with it. That's one thing. But the NHS seem particularly entrenched in this idea that they will continue as they have been, with an unwavering commitment to trans people, but not really addressing the women's rights concerns that were raised in this very case.
I mean, this is a clear example of the fact that it takes bureaucracies a long time to change course, because this has been the sort of official doctrine of British HR bureaucracy for years and years, and people have been promoted not on the basis of it necessarily, but it has very much been the management culture. It's been how you signal that you're a good person, and many of them probably genuinely believe it. And the fact that the Supreme Court has delivered this judgment and provided welcome clarification to what the actual obligations under the Equality Act are does not necessarily mean that these people are suddenly prepared, like Sir Keir Starmer, obviously a lawyer, finds it easier, to turn on a dime and start professing something else. I did see something very sort of strange in the NHS story, which is they said these trusts are looking to introduce unisex toilets, or I think in addition to segregated toilets, so that trans women don't have to share with men. But of course, it's a unisex toilet. They'll be sharing it with everyone who happens to be passing that corridor and want to use it.
And the other aspect to this story, as I mentioned, the London Marathon allowing participants to self-identify. You could be male, female. If you say you're female, you'll be in the female category. Now, that's interesting because World Athletics, of course, have very different rules. But apparently the London Marathon are saying, yeah, if you're a bloke that's, you know, fairly fit in the running department, but you want to call yourself a woman, you can enter the women's race. I find that, of all the areas of sport, I mean, snooker, darts, I know those areas are contentious as well, but the London Marathon, where physical strength, the size of your legs, your muscles, your bone structure, pretty crucial elements to running a big old race.
Yeah, and things like lung capacity. I think the question for the London Marathon, as a private organisation, I believe that they are within their rights to sort of decide their own rules on this. Yeah. But the question for the London Marathon is, why do you have a women's race, right? Why not just have a big race? Why not just have two mixed races? You know, there is the logic to having a female competition, and outside maybe, I don't know, areas like shooting, where it was simply the Victorians didn't want the men and women doing the same thing or whatever. But in this case, there is a clear biological reason that men and women have a different performance envelope on average, right? That's why it exists, to give women a fair shot at competing against people starting from the same baseline. And trans women, natal men who went through male puberty, have all of the male biological advantages. Yeah. Sport, I could get tired of saying it really, I'm sure you're bored of hearing me say it, sport is segregated on the basis of sex, not on the basis of gender. They're different things. The left used to be really big on this. Yeah. Sex is not the same thing as gender. But all of a sudden, they're conflating the two again. It is, I think, an absurd decision and unfair on female competitors in the race.
100%. Henry, stay with us. Lots more to come, including for the first time in history, the Lib Dems have come up with a policy that sounds rather good. And how many unsolved crimes were there last year? We'll have details on the way. Henry Heale is with us from Conservative Home. 0344 499 1000. Over to you. And that question, would you support a Reform UK and Conservative pact, that somehow they either get together or they come to some kind of agreement about where they stand candidates, some sort of unification? Is that your cup of tea? Our lines are open. This is Talk.
I would argue, some girl sitting there saying, I was really miserable and unhappy, but now I've cut my breasts off and now I'm pretending I'm a boy or non-binary, now I'm happy. I would consider that to be harmful content. Now, that's the stuff that's been promoted by a large number of the people, like the Peter Kyles and others, as helpful stuff.
This is where legislation should come in. And legislation isn't the answer to everything, because it's always trying to play catch-up. You can't legislate against stopping kids from accessing stuff in their bedrooms. What you can do is turn around to social media companies and say, you must take greater responsibility.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Chris in Ottershaw says, Ian, I think the people with skills to govern will join Reform and not want to be a tall poppy to be cut down like Richard Tice and serve under Nigel Farage's leadership for the benefit of the country. Interesting one, Chris. Thank you for that. Let's get some more stories here. Henry Heale is with us. Henry, of course, is the deputy editor at Conservative Home. And this one as well from the Lib Dems. I don't think there's a person in the land, Henry, that won't support the idea that the Lib Dems have come up with, led by Sir Ed Davey, of course, proposing that people playing loud music on public transport should be fined £1,000. Who would disagree with that?
I know, right? It's incredible.
Yeah.
The fascinating thing is the Lib Dems have spotted an opportunity, essentially, to move on to Tory territory in the places I was talking about a few moments ago in the South, with those ABC1 sort of higher income voters. And this is a very eye-catching policy which really plays into that, right? Because it's a classic law and order story, right? Law and order policy. It's taking something that's quite small. It's not violent assault or murder or anything else, but is profoundly irritating, and which I think actually contributes to the sense that people get that the public realm is decaying and is not as safe or pleasant as it once was. And it applies a really hard solution. And I, for one, am really looking forward. I urge Labour and the Conservatives to beat this policy. We need a policy arms race in who can deal with people playing loud music on public transport most harshly.
And it's not just loud music, of course, it's people who decide to do FaceTime calls or put the caller on speakerphone. Only yesterday, while getting on the train home from work, there was a guy who looked like a businessman. He was about 40, probably a professional, I would guess, sitting on a crowded train. It was diagonal to where I was sitting, but he had somebody sitting right next to him, and he was having a phone call where we could hear both sides of it. And I'm thinking, how did you not get the memo? There's no one in the land that doesn't know. If you went for a drink with his mates that night, it could easily come up in conversation. You know, one of those annoying things in life, people who do that on train. How could somebody not know this? Who are this mysterious contingent of the human gene pool, Henry, that still think, regardless of race, creed, sex, colour, age, who think it's perfectly acceptable to do that? Who are they?
Well, I suppose the core of them are just extremely self-absorbed people who probably don't give a thought day to day what impact they're having on the people around them. But over time, the problem with social norms is that they can change, they can corrode. If lots of other people are playing music on the tube or having a loud phone conversation or playing videos, actually maybe the most annoying. If everyone else is doing it, there will be people at the margins who start doing it too, and that process accumulates. I do think it is extraordinary. One advantage of being a sort of slightly chunky skinhead is that when I ask people to turn their phones off on public transport, they do tend to.
They do,
which is quite nice. But it's for years my personal pet peeve. I was traveling up to Manchester a lot. I'd specifically book the quiet carriage. It's in the name. My view was that people who had a phone call in the quiet carriage should literally just be thrown off the train.
100%, yes.
Yeah, £1,000 is a small step in the right direction.
Yeah, bang on. I doubt it will ever become law. Don't know why, because these are obvious things, but, you know, we live in, again, curious times. Final one here, Henry. Over 5,700 crimes went unsolved daily in 2024. Every day, prompting, it's the Lib Dems again, calling for scrapping police and crime commissioners in favour of frontline policing. Let's have a listen to Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, this month on Labour's plans to tackle the issue of criminality.
We'll set out later today the increased number of officers and PCSOs in this coming year as a result of the £200 million additional funding that we've given police forces for neighbourhood policing. And it's part of a neighbourhood policing guarantee, so it means you'll get a named contactable officer in your area. It means increased neighbourhood patrols, particularly in areas like town centres where we know we've had problems with shop theft, street crime and so on. And it's about reversing the decimation of neighbourhood policing that we've seen across the country.
I mean, these figures are absolutely huge, and there is, just to, I suppose, Henry, compound the problem, there's no sense that they're going to get better anytime soon.
No, the collapse in policing of household crime is absolutely extraordinary. I think a few years ago, half of English police forces had not solved a single burglary in the previous 12 months, which, you know, is absolutely extraordinary. The reason to always be skeptical about announcements like this from the Home Secretary is that it's very easy. You know the phrase, the measure becomes the target, right? If they say, oh, you've got to speak to every victim, the police will speak to every victim. But I will believe that the government is taking this seriously when the target is for solve rates, right? Actually solving the crimes, not weird steps in the process of solving them, actually solving the crimes, because that's the only thing that will force the police to redeploy resources sufficiently to start making a difference versus other priorities.
Again, you know, Yvette Cooper and others will talk about solving crime, being tough on crime. I think there is an appetite for people to get really tough on crime, and that seems to be the missing part of the jigsaw, that we, you know, still allow shoplifters to get away with it. We don't give prison sentences for people caught carrying a knife. And until a government somewhere is going to get that robust on it, we're going to be back with the same problem every day. Listen, Henry, thank you as ever. He is Henry Heale, Deputy Editor at Conservative Home. Thank you to him. Anything you've heard there so far, give us a shout, 0344 499 1000. One in from George says there is a sizable chunk of the electorate on the left. Most people don't want to be seen as extreme right. However, a majority now want illegal immigrants dealt with via deportations and net zero dealt with, starting with Ed Millipede. Also possibly by deportation. Once in the voting booth, your vote is private, so I think reform will do very well. No one needs to know how you voted. These are the kind of the shy Tories, as they used to be called, or the shy Reform UK voters. Lines, thank you, George, for that. Lines are open. We've got 3 voices to respond to this story in just a couple of moments. Over to you as well. 1:30, this is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
On 1:30. So Nigel Farage has dismissed claims of a pact between Reform UK and the Conservatives, calling the idea revolting, I tell you, dear boy, to his supporters. In a leaked recording, Robert Jenrick spoke of uniting Reform and Tory voters to challenge Labour. Mr Farage responded by pledging on X that Reform would establish a minister for deportations, highlighting an area where the Tories failed in their time in government. In a moment, we'll speak to Alex Wilson, Reform UK London Assembly member, also James Heale, Deputy Political Editor at The Spectator. First, Tobias Ellwood, former Conservative MP, is with us. Tobias, good afternoon to you. You've been a Tory forever. How does this sit with you, the idea that you would merge into a party run by Nigel Farage?
Well, you've illustrated it in your excellent introduction, this morphing between local matters and what's going on the national stage. And I say this as a former local councillor as well as a former MP, how frustrating it is to see how the national mood music impacts on local elections. Yeah. It's happened before, and I'm sure we're going to see it in May as well. Good councillors losing their seats as voters use the local elections to air their frustrations about the national issues, such as migration and so on. You know, the May elections should be about who's best fit to run the large local authority budgets, you know, to who's going to do sort out the council services, fix potholes, for example, but also a vision as to where your local community might be heading. Yep. But all this is lost. It's in this bigger national debate about who is making their mark on the Westminster stage. And it's why local election results, people like yourselves, use it as a barometer, if you like. But
that's always been the case, Tobias, hasn't it? There's always been that sort of litmus test of how the country feels in a wider national sense.
You're right. And I just felt the need to vent.
No, you're absolutely bang on. It should be about who's going to fix the, as you say, the potholes and the parks and the like.
It is. And so we end up talking about these wider factors. This particular elections, I think, are going to be very significant indeed. Reform, you just mentioned, there's a resurgence there. Many making substantial inroads and appealing to disillusioned voters, I would say, across the spectrum. But you've also got the decline of this two-party system, if you like, the fragmentation of traditional two-party dominance. And we're now seeing not just Reform, but also other smaller parties starting to make their mark, the Lib Dems and the Greens. Very, very different elections indeed. And of course, parties are sort of regrouping as well. Labour is seeking to reconnect with traditional voters. Sure. And I think you implied it too. The Conservatives are wanting to win back the disaffected who voted Reform last year. So much to absolutely play for. And then, of course, we've got the powerful mayors being elected too. But all this, as you imply, is being overshadowed by this debate about whether or not the Conservatives should somehow merge in some way with Reform. I've never known in all my time any deal being made before the elections. You may have coalitions afterwards. But let's have more confidence in what we stand for before we go into battle.
But in principle, if we look at what is happening with the polling at the moment, if we look at what happened to the Conservatives at the last election, it was pretty grim stuff. I don't need to tell you that, Tobias. Here we are with a scenario where you've got these leaders and senior politicians in both parties. They're encouraging this narrative. It's being talked about. Based on what we know, can you imagine a scenario where either there would be a merging or at least some kind of tacit agreement, you know, constituency dependent on how they stand candidates, for example? Can you see that being a thing?
Well, let me pose the question as to whether parties that garner support from their base alone, from their extreme, actually get across the line. This is about your campaign strategy. What part of the political spectrum should you be targeting? You know, elections, in my view, are still won by mobilizing your base, very important indeed, but appealing to about the third of the electorate who are the floating voter. And if you are too far to your extreme, left or right, Jeremy Corbyn was never going to win the general election. You won't get enough support to cross the line. And look back in the history, you know, Disraeli, Baldwin, Churchill, Thatcher, who, you know, brought both sides but appealed to the nation. Sure. Cameron as well, all appealed beyond their base. So this is what we should be asking ourselves. And I make the case that perhaps there's some other agendas taking place here. We have a flawed system in the Tory process of electing our leader, created by William Hague. I'm afraid until we fix that, because if you have aspirations to be party leader, it's the membership you seek to impress, not your fellow colleagues or the wider electorate. And that's a recipe for disloyalty. And there's, absolutely clarity that when you show disloyalty, ill discipline, I saw this at the last election, you did as well, you do not win votes. And, the public is turned off by this ill discipline, factionalisation, and that overshadows any advancement policy that you might be putting forward. It's not the statecraft that British people expect.
Tobias, as a Conservative, what do you think of Reform UK? What do you think of Mr Farage?
Well, I try to understand what they actually stand for, because from my perspective, they're very good at saying what is wrong. Playing to the electorate's fears. They openly pursue a populist agenda, but it's less clear about how they would actually fix things. And that's the trouble. But when you get into government, you then have the responsibility to actually provide the answers. So coming out with a new title for a migration minister, for example, or leaving the ECHR, I mean, that particularly, warrants greater scrutiny. It's totemic now, isn't it? This idea that we're going to leave this, a panacea to solve our migration problems. But it will trigger huge legal, political and international fallout that could create more problems than it actually solves. It was created by Churchill to, shaped in Britain's image. I'm not saying it shouldn't be amended. I'm not saying that there is some challenges there, but there's some deeper issues about migration, of not dealing with the challenges at source, where these people are coming from in the first place, with a breakdown of governance, breakdown of security, rising extremism from Africa and Asia and so on. That's why these people are coming to Europe and then heading to the UK, not because of some legal fix that we might do through the ECHR.
Tobias Ellwood, thank you. He is, of course, former Conservative MP and former Minister. Thank you to him. Let's get a word from Alex Wilson, Reform UK London Assembly member. Alex, good afternoon to you. I think Tobias Ellwood's probably not going to be crossing any lines soon based on what he's just said. Your party's all about, moaning rather than doing, essentially, is what he told us. We just dropped, literally, as I finished the question, Alex Wilson just dropped off at that point. It does happen. We'll get him back on. We're going to talk to James Heale as well in a couple of moments. This one in from Caroline regarding the trans issue. I have 2 points to make. Why are the already vulnerable trans-identifying men who are up in arms not directing their anger at the groups and organisations such as the NHS who've lied to them for years by telling them they are women and that they can therefore invade women's private groups and spaces? The Supreme Court has confirmed that they are not and never have been women. They should direct their anger and energy towards those who have continually and willfully misled them. Second point, why is it for women to accommodate these men? They say they would feel uncomfortable and possibly unsafe in a men's toilet. Men need to be encouraged and educated to accept trans women in their toilets. It is not a problem that solely for women, that solely women who have been too tolerant for far too long should have to deal with, says Caroline in Glasgow. It's a very good point. I mean, the problem has been sort of lumped with women. You've got to solve this, women. Solve it. It's like, well, hang on, you just gave us a problem and then told us to solve the problem. That can't work. That's not logical. Let's get back to that issue of a pact, Reform UK and a Tory pact. Would you encourage that? Vote for that? Would it be the answer to everything? Would it boot Labour out of office? James Heale, Deputy Political Editor at The Spectator, is with us. Afternoon to you, James. I mean, there's a good chance it would boot Labour out of office, but is it likely to happen? Both sides going, no, it's revolting, it's a terrible idea. By the way, spoiler alert, they're lying, because something will happen between now and 2029.
Look, I think that something will probably happen, yes, because I think that the Tories and Reform are going to sort of try and look at who's taking each other's votes, etc. And obviously the arithmetic doesn't necessarily add up. But the key question, of course, is about leadership and who's it going to be under. And, I don't see why Nigel Farage would sort of step aside his candidates. He's already done that once before in 2019 with the Brexit Party. So right now, I think it's much more about sort of the Tories coming up with a sort of counter-reform strategy, and they're really struggling to do that right now.
Do you? I mean, obviously, there's a lot of play going on here. A lot of the idea that it's could happen is awful, says Nigel Farage. Revolting was the word he used. Kemi Badenoch, I can't remember quite the phrase, but said something on the lines of "It's my job to eliminate Nigel Farage," etc. So they're talking this talk, but secretly, I think Robert Jenrick's point is probably the one many Conservatives know to be the reality, and that is that if not a pact as such, but certainly some kind of constituency arrangement, is going to be imperative if you're going to boot the Labour government with a huge majority out of office.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole range of different options, right? So that ranges from, direct competition to a direct merger. And there's lots of sort of different strategies along the way. So you could, for instance, have what some Conservatives want is a sort of inversion of last year, where you had the Liberal Democrats going after the Tories seats in the southeast and southwest, and Labour going after them basically everywhere else. So the sort of thinking in some Tory circles is, right, like, let's leave those places like Doncaster North, the Yvette Cooper's seat, Ed Miliband's seat, those places, etc. Those seats where Reform, there's 90-odd seats where Reform came second. Let's leave those to Reform, because the red wall isn't going to be going blue anytime soon again, and then we'll focus on everything else. Reform, though, saying, look, we're not going to just go after 100 seats. We want to be the next Prime Minister of this country, we want to be the next government, and therefore we need 330 seats. Right now, I think it's going to be difficult to see how anything happens in the next short, medium term, but I will say that I do think people are very much aware about this. Can this last or not? And you look, for instance, at Canada, the Canadian Reform Party is where Nigel Farage got his inspiration from. Eventually, the Reform Party ended up taking over the Progressive Conservatives and sort of cannibalising them. So I think that could be something long-term. But right now, it seems, I think we have to have a few elections in which the right is split in order to hammer home that message that something needs to happen. Yeah. Whether it means putting Nigel Farage out of business or getting into bed with him, that's the key question lots of Conservatives are considering right now.
Indeed. I mean, could it be next week that this happens?
I think that would be too soon. But I do think that will focus some minds on what it actually means, and where the Tory party's, I think, relative decline really will be illustrated next week when they lose 70 or so councillors.
I mean, we talk, as you know, James, we talk to a lot of voters. There are many Reform UK voters, and let's be honest, most Reform UK voters were once Conservatives, it seems. I think that's reasonable. And many of them that I speak to would never, in even holding their nose, they simply wouldn't go back. They feel so bitterly let down by what happened with the last Conservative government for many reasons, not just illegal immigration. We're talking about trans issues a lot lately. Again, that didn't just start under Keir Starmer. That was well underway. The so-called woke issues, many non-crime, hate crimes, all of this stuff sort of flourished under the Conservatives. So it's the sense that, the Tories have kind of lost their way. They wouldn't go back. But simultaneously, there are a lot of Conservative voters that absolutely loathe Nigel Farage. They can't bear the idea that, that's not why they're Tories, to be in bed with Nigel Farage and Reform. That's not who they are as Conservatives. So it does work both ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that if you look at, say, half of Reform's voters, I believe that pollsters like More in Common have studied this. If they've got into bed with the Conservatives, they lose half their vote straight away. So the key question, I think, is going to be, how do you sort of get them together in a way that isn't sort of just dismissing them sort of voting blocks? Because voters are complicated. And also, there's a fair number of people who go from Labour to Reform. Right now, I just think we're in a completely different place to where we'll end up going. And I think that the current leadership, because I think Farage and Badenoch are such key characters, etc., in all of this. Until they go, I'm not sure that we can see any kind of unifying pact or deal.
Spot on. James, thank you as ever. James Heale is Deputy Political Editor at The Spectator magazine. We've got Alex Wilson back on the good old-fashioned phone line. Alex Wilson, of course, Reform UK London Assembly member. Afternoon to you, Alex. We got you back finally. We were just, before you came on initially, we were listening to Tobias Ellwood. Essentially, he was saying, doesn't know what you guys really stand for. He knows you moan a lot, I'm paraphrasing here. Doesn't really know what you could do in office. So, are they taking you seriously?
Well, they're going to have to take us seriously because we're leading in the polls. We're going to do very well next week in the various elections that are going on in key parts of the country. And I think the Conservatives, they haven't quite worked out how to respond to us yet. And these ideas sort of bouncing around. Robert Jenrick can say what he wants. He's not the leader. He had a chance to become the leader of the Conservative Party, and his own members turned him down. So, for him to talk about trying to bring everyone back together and unite the right, it's for the birds. And I just caught the tail end of James talking about the sort of polling implications. I think with both parties, both parties' current support, a large chunk of that would run a mile from this. I mean, last night I was at a branch meeting in Basildon, and I asked at one point, what would you guys think if we did a deal with the Tories? And I was almost booed off the stage at that point. Whereas for the rest of my speech, they were lapping it up. So clearly there isn't an appetite in Reform for us doing this sort of thing. It would it would be a disaster.
I mean, it's just the Tories, though, isn't it? It's just the Tory party. It's not like George Galloway's Workers' Party or whatever. It's not the Socialists. It's not, it's the Tories, for goodness sake. You're not that far away from them.
Well, in theory, perhaps. I mean, I was a Conservative Party member for 21 years, very active, served as a councillor. worked hard to get lots of colleagues and friends elected, and I've still got a lot of friends in the Conservative Party, but they failed in government. They had 14 years to deliver a clear centre-right agenda, and they failed to do that. If they delivered on the economy, if they'd not committed to the net zero lunacy, if they'd not opened the borders, there wouldn't be a need for reform at all. So this is entirely their making, this issue, and we are responding to the fact that this country needs a genuine right-of-centre alternative to the Labour government and to how the Conservatives operated when they were themselves in power.
And you're right that the polling does reflect that at the moment. It's not just one poll. There's been consistent polls that have shown a very similar trend. Does it not show, though, despite that, it would be pretty much impossible for Reform UK to form the next government just based on the mathematics? So some kind of agreement is almost not just desirable for some, but necessary.
There's a long way to go between now and the next election. It's probably 4 years away. And if you just look at the scale of the growth that we've had since the last election. In the last election, we only got 5 MPs. We've got 4 million votes, 15% of the vote. We're now, in some polls, pushing double that. And that's just in the last 9 months. Another 4 years of this progress, who knows where we could be. I think we've got to go into these elections, or the local elections next year. We've got more candidates than any other party. Building up to the next general election, we have to go in there with the intention of winning this. And what happens afterwards, who knows. But we are a national party. It was a huge mistake, as it turned out to be, when Brexit Party stood down candidates in 2019. It killed the national campaign, then made the party irrelevant in that contest. We're not going to follow that route again. We're in it to win it. I want Nigel to be next Prime Minister, and I'm going to do everything in my power to make that happen.
All right, Alex, thank you. Very honest and straightforward stuff from Alex Wilson, Reform UK London Assembly member. Over to you on this one. Has there not got to be some kind of pact between the Tories and Reform UK? And how do you feel as a Tory voter or as a Reform UK voter? I can see, Reform UK voters are mostly disgruntled Tories who cross the line. So it will be easy to understand why you might say never. But what if you're a Conservative voter and remain a Conservative voter? How do you feel on that one? 0344 499 1000. Lines are open. This is Talk.
I would argue some girl sitting there saying, I was really miserable and unhappy, but now I've cut my breasts off and now I'm pretending I'm a boy or non-binary, now I'm happy. I would consider that to be harmful content. Now, that's the stuff that's been promoted by a large number of the people, like the Peter Kyles and others, as helpful stuff.
This is where legislation should come in. And legislation isn't the answer to everything because it's always trying to play catch-up. You can't legislate against stopping kids from accessing stuff in their bedrooms, but what you can do is turn around to social media companies and say, you must take greater responsibility.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is talk.
A lot of criticism of Tobias Ellwood as well. Who it's interesting, you know, Tobias Ellwood went from kind of hero to zero, didn't he? He was the guy that, you know, those dramatic pictures after the Westminster terrorist attack, trying to save a man's life. You know, he was there on the scene. And he genuinely was doing his level best to, you know, bring someone to life, covered in blood. Very dramatic scenes. It was all hail the mighty Tobias, and I don't know what specifically happened, but. Yeah, not everybody's idea of a conservative maybe is as simple as that, and has become to many people not just person non grata but public enemy number one. This comes in from Alan, who's enjoying the show. Thanks, Al. Your guest Henry Heale and his Tory colleagues must understand that Nigel Farage is not taking his party too far to the right. It is the Tories that have deserted the right and moved to the centre left, and now even come across as the Liberal Party. Also, whatever discussion he may have on the transgender issue, it is his party that oversaw all of this nonsense whilst they were in government. The lack of understanding amongst the political class on these issues, important to the public, is frightening. Absolutely bang on, Alan. And I did just make that point, as you would have heard, to one of our previous guests, that all this stuff happened under the Conservatives, the trans issues, the net zero stuff, all the migration issues. It all happened and grew and went largely unchecked or unnoticed. In fact, I was always a bit suspicious of Boris Johnson and how Boris was possibly the most of all. I know some people on the left think Boris Johnson is some kind of hard right Trump character. He couldn't be anything further from that. You know, this is a very pro-immigration, pro-net zero, pro-trans, very, very liberal, very centre left of the conservative spectrum. Not half an hour ago, if you'd have asked someone to name a right-wing Tory, you wouldn't have got anyone say Boris Johnson, for God's sake. You know, and he then played to the sort of Brexit gallery by pretending he was a Brexiteer, when I don't think for one second he ever really was, or if he was, it was very tacitly. And that's fine, until you're putting yourself up as the person to represent the cause. But a lot of people fell for it. Well, yeah, Boris, yeah, he's the man. Sunny Uplands, yeah, Independence Day. It's Boris, isn't it? He's our man. He was a great political operator in terms of speaking the language of the people. But philosophically, I think he was absolutely barren, and always has been, frankly. Norman's in Leicestershire. Norman, how you doing?
Oh, not bad, thanks. And how are you?
Yeah, I'm good as gold, thanks, Norm, at this end. What are your thoughts on this coalition?
Well, ever since I left, I'm retired now, retired, and even when I first started voting, I voted Tory.
Yeah.
Even though I'm a working man.
Yeah.
But the last election, I would not touch them with a barge pole. I joined the Reform Party. I'm still a member. And if it takes a coalition between the Tories and Reform to get this bunch of muppets out, that's what we need to do, because we don't need them in power for a millisecond longer than necessary. They're just ruining the country. I mean, as I say, I'm a pensioner.
Yeah.
I've paid in all my life for a pension. But if you've noticed, not just this bunch of muppets, they've changed it. It's now not a pension, it's a benefit, so that they can mess with it.
And there's a lot of messing going on, right?
Well, I mean, as I say, I understand, or maybe I'm a million miles out here, that Charles can dissolve Parliament.
I think in theory, yes.
Now, that's what he should do. We should dissolve this lot, because all they're doing is ruining the country.
Yeah.
And as for two-tier Keir, well, he can't even say what a woman is, and yet he's married to one. He wants us back in Europe. And again, I'm going back now to Ted Heath, who took us into the common market, and I voted no then. I would have stood Ted Heath against the wall and shot him as a traitor, because he knew what was going to happen. All this rubbish.
In fact, I think there's quite a lot of evidence now as how much Ted Heath would have known I mean, just by opening his eyes and his ears would have told him, listen, Norman, I get the exasperation, thank you. Great call, Norman in Leicestershire. This will be James, who's in Kent. What have you got for us, James? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian. Tassie can hear me all right, fella Kent boy. Yeah, I think it would be absolutely suicidal for the Reform Party to get into bed with the Tories now, because there's factions on the Tory and the Labour Party that want to see the death of reform killed dead quickly. So they'll just nick their ideas. You'll have reform diluted very quickly. They'll be out of the way. No pact now. Do a pact when it's all done and danced after the election, with a good set of seats for Reform and Tory, and nicely can turn around and say, come and get me, but however, I'm Prime Minister. Stick that in your pipe and smoke it. That is the course of action that just to reiterate, you had a caller on earlier, I first voted 1983 for the Tory party, never wavered. However, since their economic vandalism, what they called lockdown, I will never vote for that party again, because they're not Tories, they're Liberal Democrats.
It's interesting, a lot of people making that point, and the only people there that are going to benefit are probably the Liberal Democrats, because some of those Tories that are comfortable with the last 14 years, James, won't want the Reform Coalition, or won't vote for Reform, or won't want any kind of pact. They will probably vote Lib Dem.
Yeah, of course we'll let them, because that's not the future. The people out here at the moment can see the way this country's going. It's being destroyed. If you start doing pacts now, the Labour Party are going to carry on for another 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, and
the time has come where we need drastic action. And the good thing about this, it has woken a lot of people up to politics that previously said, oh, they're all the same. Yeah. They're thinking, well, are they? Well, might be doing something different.
There could be a big old test of that very point, as you rightly say. James, I've got to stop there because the news is coming on, and your line was slightly dying on us as well. James in Kent, thank you to him. 0344 499 1000. We've got Robert Taylor joining us in the next section as well to chew the fat on some of these stories. It's your comment that is crucial to all proceedings here. 0344 499 1000 is where you'll find us. Let's get the news headlines now at 2 o'clock.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Yes, good afternoon. 0344 499 1000. 3 minutes after 2 o'clock. Welcome back to the home of Common Sense. As we've been discussing, Nigel Farage has issued a brutal slapdown to Robert Jenrick's suggestion of a Tory-Reform Coalition to take down Labour, saying his party would be, quote, revolted by the idea. Your response on that? Would you support some kind of pact between the Tories and Reform UK? We'll take more of your calls on that. Also this afternoon, Chancellor Rachel Reeves says there will be no return to free movement, but has confirmed talks with the EU on a youth mobility scheme to allow Europeans, young Europeans, to work here temporarily. This is something, by the way, again, it's the same problem. Rishi Sunak was pondering this very thought. Should you let the kids travel unfettered? Responses to that as well. And households in southern parts of England could face higher electricity bills under proposed zonal pricing plans being considered by the government, which would link costs to regional supply and demand. It could mean those down south end up paying more for their bills. No one wants to pay more than we currently are, right? 0344 499 1000 is where you will find us. This comes in from Rich, or Betty even, who says, great show. Look at Labour, 14 years of preparation, 500,000 members, and look at the cabinet they've put together. This reform stuff is delusional. Where are they going to find 300 quality candidates and decent cabinet when decent cabinet should that be when Farage is only interested in himself, says Betty. They can never do better than 24% without ditching the Tommy Robinson brigade. Then they have to deal with losing 4 million of their benefits voters, dropping them when they finally understand reform policy, says Betts. Maggie in Cheshire, if Reform made a pact with the devil, I would still vote for them, whatever it takes to get this party of country wreckers out of office. This one in from Francis in Wilton. My experience of Reform locally is that their policies are a blank sheet of paper and the message is back Farage and then work it out as they can in the coming years, bigging themselves up. I prefer more serious policy, both local and national, so I continue to contribute to the Conservative Policy Forum and the Great British Pack. Far too soon to talk about mergers or collaborations. It is interesting, almost too delicious when you look at some of the polling at the moment. And Paula in Salford says, breaking news, Tobias Ellwood is not a Conservative, which is why he got unelected. He's very much part of the problem the Tories have, not the solution. A Ramona and a Europhile, he needs to join the Lib Dems or voters will continue to migrate to Reform UK. I think the more interesting question there, thank you Paula for that, is what are those Tories that don't feel like that actually back Tobias Ellwood? There's like 100 or more of those guys. This is MPs. I couldn't tell you on the wider party. I think there are a big percentage of those that probably quite like the cut of Nigel Farage's jib in many respects. But the MPs, 100 or so MPs, that would rather die than get into bed with Reform. And some of their constituents will feel the same. Now, that's significant come an election. Significant not for the Tories, because they would still lose, but significant for Reform, because based on that, they probably wouldn't win. Based on the current MPs and their constituents. You take the point. Let's get a word on this story and the other big stories of the day. Robert Taylor, the journalist and broadcaster, back with us. Robert, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian.
I think you and I have discussed this scenario for a long time now in different forms. The latest, of course, comes courtesy of Robert Jenrick. He was caught in a leaked recording. I take that term very loosely. A leaked recording. He had no idea it was going to leak out, saying he wants to unite the Conservatives and Reform to stop voters. He didn't talk about merging the parties as such, but clearly some kind of pact. I guess the question is, what kind of support does that have across the country? A lot of Reform voters really aren't buying it because they're mostly former Tories. But what about the Conservative Party and their voters? Would they buy it?
Yeah, well, some of them would and some of them wouldn't. I mean, if you talk to Tory voters last time, that small minority of people, I'm afraid, who voted Tory last time, some of them would rather have Keir Starmer than Nigel Farage. Some of them would rather have Ed Davey than Nigel Farage.
Yep.
Others, as you said in your intro, would just do anything to get Keir Starmer out of Downing Street and would go for a Farage Badenoch Pact or whoever's leading the Tory party come 2029. But there's not a natural crossover as there is on the left. So on the left, tactical voting between the Lib Dems, Greens and Labour was a big element of the last election. It's not so easy on the right. And that's the problem for this pact between the two. It doesn't naturally fit as well as it does on the left.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. But there is an irredeemable reality, and that is, despite the polls, it would be unlikely, not impossible, but unlikely that Reform UK could just simply form a majority government at the next election, even though those polls, as I mentioned, certainly suggest they're doing rather extraordinary based on the polling, and they've been reasonably consistent across different pollsters. So there's that problem, and that ultimately means that if there isn't any kind of agreement, you simply divide the right-wing vote, and Keir Starmer gets another 5 years in the gig.
And that's why I'm in favour of eventually a pact. No one wants to talk about it right now because Reform reckons it can win on its own. Maybe it feels it can creep up into the early 30s. Badenoch and the Tories think we're the natural party of government. Look at us, for the last 100 years, we formed the government for about 2/3 of that time. Yeah. We can recover, we can do it by ourselves. My feeling is, Ian, and it's difficult to predict the next 4.5 years, but my feeling is that neither of those parties is going to beat the other one up sufficiently well that they're going to win the majority of the right. I think it's going to be very finely balanced. I wouldn't be at all surprised when push comes to shove if we see a Tory-Reform alliance of some sort before 2029.
Yeah, I think you're bang on. I can't honestly see any other way. Of course, in the meantime, they've both got to pretend that it's a terrible idea, or revolting, as Nigel Farage called it.
Well, yeah, and for some Reform voters, the idea of voting Tory would be revolting, I'm quite sure. And by the way, it works the other way as well. But if you get to the stage in 2029 where you're thinking, if we get into bed with each other, this is the only way to kick Starmer out of Downing Street, I reckon both sets of supporters will hold their nose and will do it.
But again, there's every chance you would be successful in that pact. If that was your aim, to kick the Labour Party out, then it would, based on trends, polling and likelihood, etc., it would probably happen. But what can't happen is to achieve that result if there's no pact at all. We will watch with interest.
We will indeed, and you're absolutely right. You just split what we would loosely call the right down the middle. Yeah. Starmer gets back into Downing Street on maybe even less than 1/3 of the vote. Yeah. Surely Reform and Tory voters don't want that to happen.
Let's move to this story. This is the EU Youth Mobility Scheme. This means that if you are under 30, you can have free movement around Europe. It's reciprocal, so we could go there, they could come here. Rachel Reeves confirmed that discussions are taking place, but she emphasised there will be no return to freedom of movement. I said at the beginning as well, Robert, that this was, I think, something that Rishi Sunak probably would have done as well. It was certainly being discussed. Naturally, people's suspicions start to illuminate. Hang on, what's going on here? We know that Starmer agitated the Brexit result. He did his level best to try and stop it happening, trying to put all sorts of strokes in Parliament, citing all manner of laws. Magna Carta, God knows what else, some he probably invented, I have no idea. It just seemed to go on forever. So we know where his heart is, and Rachel Reeves and the entire Labour front bench. So many, understandably, are seeing this as, hang on a second, this is Starmer taking us back into the EU.
Yeah, and we would trust Rishi Sunak with this because Rishi Sunak was, of course, a Brexiteer. He voted for Brexit. He believed in Brexit. But as you say, we know the reverse is true of Keir Starmer in particular.
Yep.
He was, if anyone led the movement for a second referendum trying to overturn Brexit, it was, of course, Keir Starmer. So the suspicion has always been with Keir Starmer that there won't be suddenly a second vote now. We're not suddenly going to go in one big leap back into the EU. It will, if you like, be death by 1,000 cuts. And this free movement for young people could be the first of those cuts, where you could say, we can see it making sense on its own, but if it leads to lots of other cuts, 999 other cuts, then eventually you're back into the EU, which we specifically voted against, of course, in 2016.
Absolutely spot on. And this one is interesting as well. Spending on disability benefits to soar by 2030 despite cuts. There's a projected rise by over 20 billion. This is just in the next 4.5 years, despite all the reforms and the cuts and everything Rachel Reeves claimed to do and the stick and the hassle that she's got from disability rights groups, etc., understandably. But there is a forecast that claimant numbers will rise from 5.9 million to 7.9 million in the next 4.5 years. I mean, this is an extraordinary amount. There is higher demand. Incapacity benefit rate is frozen for current claimants and halved for new ones, alongside new employment support schemes. Whatever they want to call it, however they want to change it, however they want to morph it, the numbers are going to go up and the cost is going to go up. That's it.
This is just an epidemic. And we thought that Labour was getting on top of this. We thought that the Department of Work and Pensions, with its cuts, was beginning to get on top of this. And now we discover that even with those cuts, disability benefits and the benefits to keep people out of work, they're too sick to work, it's completely out of control. And by 2030, you can have even more people. I think the figure, did you just say it, Ian, is up to 4 million people projected by 2030 to be too ill to work. These are working age people. This is unsustainable. Where are we going to get the money from to support millions and millions of people who we're writing off as too ill to work? It's got to stop. And
interestingly, anxiety and depression now account for the largest share of personal independence payments. That in itself, for the last financial year, was £3.4 billion. Anxiety and depression. There's a big old chasm between those two words as well, which is where I think we all start to go, hang on a second, somebody's got full-on depression, you know, we all get that. That's a genuine issue that you need help with, and you may be off work and you may be incapacitated in the same way as a physical injury. Nobody disputes that. Anxiety, I think, isn't that called living? Bit of life, and once in a while, no one ever said it's a one-way street of happiness, joy, success and positivity. So anxiety is something we all get a bit of.
Yeah, it sounds terribly harsh, doesn't it? But it does look as though it's just far too easy to be signed off work for, as you say, the normal cut and thrust of human life. And the other thing to say here is that it appears the UK is a bit of an outlier here. These massive shifts upwards in the terms of people getting disability allowances. This is pretty much unique to the UK in the extent that it's happening in the Western world. So what are we doing wrong here? Is it just that British people are more depressed and anxious than other people? I don't believe that. Or is it something to do with our system that encourages people to be signed off work? I'm pretty sure, Ian, it's the latter.
Well, we could argue in favour of the former that Keir Starmer has made people more depressed and anxious. I mean, so maybe it's actually that simple. And, come 2029, it'll be happy days again and we'll all be having street parties.
Well, in which case, in 2029, that 4 million people will come down very rapidly to just a couple of million or maybe just a million. We'll see if that happens.
Spot on. Robert, thank you as ever. Robert Taylor, the journalist and the broadcaster. I've always said this, and I stand by it. I'd even write a paper and give a lecture on this one if I was asked to do so. I just sense we are in a period of... And it's not that people are genuinely anxious. I mean, some people have anxiety and it's bad and it's crippling. I get it. And there are people who are suffering from clinical depression, and that can be debilitating and in some cases life-ending. That's a given, but sometimes you have to keep saying this stuff. But I think there's another group. It's not that people are bone idle. in the conventional sense, I don't want to go to work. I just sense we're living in such a challenging time financially. And even when you're in a job where you earn a good wage, I can't be the only person. There's been loads of people listening to this who earn really good money, far more money than I earn, and there'll be lots of people who earn far less than I earn. But those that are at the reasonable top taxpayers who are, you know, earning a really good wage, and I would put myself in that position, when you begin to note it, and it takes longer to feel the pinch. That's the interesting bit. It's kind of like a middle-class trap that you find yourself in. You suddenly go, hang on a sec, what's going on here? Why? I was talking to somebody recently who was talking about the inability to save money, and he was earning a really good wage, really good wage. He's going, I just can't seem to save any money every month. And a lot of it was where he lived, and, you know, he chose to live where he did because it suited him and he could afford to. But then everything around him has gone up, and then you have kids, and you discover that kids, you know, don't just go to school and need clothes and food. They have clubs, and they get to a certain age where you think, hang on, the school clubs are, you know, it's 40 quid here, 40 quid there, 30 quid for that. Football on a Saturday morning, that's another 50 quid a month. There's a cricket in the summer, that's another and suddenly you've got this big old list, and it just what are you meant to do? Not send your kids to those clubs because you don't, you know, it's too expensive, but all their mates go to those clubs. So you find yourself in a bit of a cul-de-sac. Nobody's shedding any tears for the people on the top rate of tax, etc. Not expecting. I'm merely pointing out that it's very easy to consider that there's a group of there will be squillionaires who are immune from all this stuff. But we're living in a time when the cost of living crisis is very noticeable. Energy bills, water bills, and the like. The cost of getting anything done. You get your car repaired. So is there a magic number out there in Car HQ where everything has to be, you just know, you take it in, it's not going to be less than 250 quid. There's this sort of magic number. How much is that? Oh, it's 250, mate. You know, I had the aircon re-gassed or whatever it's called the other day, £177. Thought it was going to be about 30 quid. I genuinely thought it was like pumping my tyres up. Couldn't believe it. So all these things. And I think for some people, where they can't see a way, and this is the problem, they can't really see a way of ever improving that. And it's the idea that you're in a position, you're 25, and you think, OK, I'm not earning a terrible wage, I'm not skint, but I'm not wealthy. The problem I have is I'm never going to improve this position. And so what is the point? So, yeah, I'm not lazy in the conventional sense. I may be complacent, maybe I'm disillusioned. And the idea of going out to work when nothing is ever going to change has become more than challenging. So I'll go to the doctors, and so I'm kind of genuine, but I'm sort of not clinically genuine, if that makes sense. I think we've got an increasing number of those cases, and I think this country is far more expensive than many other similar economies. 0344 499 1000. Back to the question as well, Reform UK and the Tory Pact. Thoughts on that? Lines are open. This is Talk.
I would argue some girl sitting there saying, I was really miserable and unhappy, but now I've cut my breasts off and now I'm pretending I'm a boy or non-binary, now I'm happy. I would consider that to be harmful content. Now, that's the stuff that's been promoted by a large number of the people, like the Peter Kyles and others, as helpful stuff.
This is where legislation should come in. And legislation isn't the answer to everything because it's always trying to play catch-up. You can't legislate against stopping kids from accessing stuff in their bedrooms. What you can do is turn around to social media companies and say, you must take greater responsibility.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This in from Bev in Hampshire. Afternoon, Ian. Let's remember, Labour didn't win a massive majority. Most people didn't vote, and those that did wanted to teach the Conservatives a lesson. I'm sick of hearing about this so-called landslide majority. Starmer got less votes than Corbyn, who lost the election. It wasn't a landslide win, but a gift from the Tories and those who either couldn't be bothered to vote or were too disillusioned to vote. That's a brilliant point, because it was a landslide. OK, they got lots of numbers, but a much smaller share of the vote. And as Bev rightly points out, Jeremy Corbyn did better than Keir Starmer on share of the vote, the amount of people that literally voted for you. So as distinct from the number of MPs, which is almost a kind of mathematical anomaly in the grander scale. Now, I don't understand disillusioned Tories going Labour. That's another story. What I think is interesting is why didn't at the last election more of those disillusioned Tories vote Reform? Why didn't they? They had the opportunity to. The Reform didn't stand in every single seat, but they stood in a lot of them, and they only won 5. Well, what's the reason? You could argue since the last election, the momentum has really built. We've seen Labour in action. A lot of people don't like what they're seeing. So I get that. But you might think that there was the perfect opportunity. If you were a Conservative voter that was disillusioned, you would go Reform. And the smart money says disillusioned Conservative voters, other than the ones that did go to Reform, actually went either to Labour or the Liberal Democrats. Remember, the Lib Dems got 72 seats, for goodness sake. They're only a third behind the Tories, who are the official opposition. And I have no idea what the Lib Dems stand for, other than their new policy of fining people for playing loud music on public transport. I mean, I'm tempted to almost vote for them on that basis alone. That's a joke, by the way. Dave's in Hampshire. What do you got for us, Dave? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian. I'd like to talk about Reform and the Tories, but did I hear you say you had a bill for 170 quid for your aircon gas? Was that like a main dealer? 177. No, it wasn't a main dealer either. Crikey, I'm almost going to get mine done. I think I'll just keep the window open. I genuinely thought, because we bought a car that had done a lot of miles, and the aircon's always been a bit... I just assumed it was bad aircon, when it's just like a blower rather than aircon. Took it down. I genuinely thought it would be about 50 quid. And it was 177. Yeah, that's what I was going to think. Yeah, on your point you've just made about where did those Tory voters go to stay at home, and this is like the middle class ABC One types, and I think Reform have got a big problem with them because they are basically Lib Dem voters, but they vote Tory because they don't want Labour, and that's what they've historically done.
Yep.
And I think what would be the best situation would be if those on the right of the Tory party, the Jacob Rees-Moggs, the Suella Bravermans, Mark Francois, I think they'd walk across the floor and join Reform because they should be honest with themselves and put their money where their mouth is. That's what I reckon.
Do you sense that, I mean, we are 4 years away, Dave, aren't we? So a lot could happen in that time. If something, if there was some kind of scandal or something, Tories or Reform UK, if we discovered something weird about Kemi Badenoch or weird about Nigel Farage, I mean, those little things can change everything.
Well, they can, but I just think that if people from the right in the Tory party were being honest with themselves about their own political views and their own political position, they wouldn't be in the Tory party because the Tory party is full of liberal wets, and that's what gave us the state of the country we're in. And, all those things we've inherited with the state of the country at the moment. Labour have turbocharged it, I grant you, but it started off with the 14 years of Tory wets being in power, not doing anything, or just the only thing when they're asked, what did you do in 14 years? I've heard you interview them, and they come up with, we improved education. And they don't say anything more than that because they didn't do anything more than that.
I mean, there's no way, they've got no defence, have they, on issues like immigration, on, areas such as non-crime, hate crimes. I mean, this stuff, I know they're not specifically in charge of these things happening, but they are in charge of stopping them from happening. They can make a law, they can make a, I never heard a Tory MP say, non-crime, hate crime. What, you get a knock on the door for something you wrote on Twitter? Sorry, that is not going to happen in my country. Never heard a Tory leader say that.
Because they tacitly approved of it, didn't they? Because they are liberals. They did. And from, Cameron onwards, really, but Theresa May signing us up to the UN, Convention on Human Rights, all these things, and then net zero with no debate in Parliament or 90 minutes or whatever it was. All these things are liberal values, and that they weren't conservative. So no. I don't see anyone, being honest, can ever vote for them if they're truly conservative. Well, I do think Reform have got a big problem with those middle classes who won't vote for Nigel because they were Remainer voters, and they just and more importantly to them, because they're very politically naive, and I know that's a sweeping statement, but I believe they are, because they care more about what their friends think rather than their own political views and beliefs.
And the Tories have just dined out on, we're a really successful party. I know it's been, less so in recent years. I mean, David Cameron did he had to form a coalition in 2010, for God's sake. He was up against Gordon Brown. They couldn't even win that outright. 2015, well, a little bit better because he promised, the referendum. Since then, there's not been some massive Tory landslide or anything like that. And I think just based on what we're saying, Dave, they've dined out for too long on this idea that, non-crime, hate crimes, net zero, immigrant, we don't get involved in that stuff. We let departments do it, we let the police deal with it, we just sit back and we, carry on doing the big stuff. They've forgotten what is important to people. Yeah,
you're exactly right. And, as an ex-Tory voter, I was a Tory voter all my life, and then went to Reform, after what happened especially what happened with lockdown and the rest of that's just unforgivable. What happened there with the Tories, and Labour, egging them on. And there's no, from there on, I just think, I can't ever vote for them again.
There it is. Dave, thank you. Good luck with the aircon, by the way. David in Hampshire, on that coalition idea, would you support the idea of a Reform UK Tory Pact? Gary says Nigel Farage might think he can finish the Conservative Party off once and for all, but surely, if that was going to happen, then it would probably have happened by now, is the point I just made, because the cons will never again be more vulnerable than they were coming off the back of the Partygate scandals, their utter failure to get to grips with both legal and illegal immigration, and their disastrous general election result. Yet there the Conservatives are, supposedly, with a terrible leader still polling above 20% and only 2 or 3 points behind the supposed rampant Reform. The truth is that support for the cons is always likely to be enough to prevent Nigel Farage from winning a majority at the general election. That's why he needs to do a deal with them, because if he doesn't, I'm afraid that after the next general election, we're going to be lumbered with a left-leaning coalition government. Yes, we are. And it would absolutely be the Labour Party and the Lib Dems. And thank you, Gary, for that, because it echoes the point that I was making about why at the last election didn't we see more support for Reform. I know Labour hadn't happened at that point, I get that, but I'm still looking back on it, still a little bit surprised. The option was there to stick your cross in the box of Reform, and not enough people did. They got 5 MPs out. It did have some close seconds. I'm not taking anything away from them. I'm merely flagging the question as to why there wasn't a big move over then. And as Gary rightly says, I mean, as bad as Kemi Badenoch is doing in comparison to other opposition parties at this stage, etc., they're not exactly on zero. If they're on 20-odd%, then that's enough to literally stop Nigel Farage. 0344 499 1000. Just gone 2:30. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 0344 499 1000. This is an interesting one. There's no name given on this. Genuine question from a new listener. If Reform were to win the next election, and by chance the Tories and Labour were to secure the same amount of seats, who would then be classed as the official opposition? Or would that be both? It's an interesting. I don't know what happens if there's literally a tie in the amount of seats. I mean, I suppose it would be argued it would be unlikely that they would get exactly the same amount of seats. But what I do find really interesting about that is that if Reform won, or even if the Tories won, if the Tories or Reform were the opposition to the other one, that would be kind of interesting. So two parties that are apparently of the right, although again we could argue that forever about the Conservatives. Yeah, can you imagine that? That would be really interesting. Good question raised there, though. Thank you. Sad we can't name check whoever sent that in. Debbie says it's too early to talk about a general election. Reform will overwhelmingly grow in the up-and-coming local elections. So if they do a good job then, I think you may see growing support up to the general election in 2029. I think that could be true. And it could be true of there's all sorts of things happening. There's by-elections still to come and will be going forward. If Reform were to hoover those up, 2 or 3 of those over the next few years, then they start to get into that territory of having 10 MPs. This is all potential stuff. A few mayors around the country as well. You begin to see things shift when you can't necessarily, you don't see it happen in one go, but gradually you turn around and go, oh wow, remember when they only had 4 MPs? Which they have now. Did have 5, of course, till Rupert Lowe legged it. But yeah, anything could change. Some would argue it could go the other way. Let's move to this story. It's an interesting one about energy. We talk about energy quite a bit. It comes up for obvious reasons, not least the cost of it. Well, households in the south could see higher electric bills under something called zonal pricing. This is being considered by the Energy Secretary, good old Ed Miliband. Critics warn the scheme would create a postcode lottery for struggling families. The plan would base prices on local supply and demand, with Scotland set to benefit from its wind energy resources. Let's speak to Sarah Honan, Head of Policy at the Association for Decentralised Energy. Good afternoon to you, Sarah.
Good afternoon.
Nice to have you with us. I mean, anything that involves the sentence energy prices might go up is clearly not going to be very welcome for those who live in areas where energy prices might, well, go up.
No, absolutely. And the interesting thing is that almost resoundingly, the research into zonal pricing shows that almost all, if not all, consumers will have lower bills, because it's about lowering the whole country's energy bill as opposed to picking and choosing.
Yeah. I mean, lowering the whole country's is great. I mean, tell us about zonal pricing then. I understand this is just sort of flunked in Italy. I may be wrong on that. I'm sure I read a headline to that effect somewhere. Is it a good thing? Could it work, or is it flawed from the off?
It absolutely could work and does work in countries all over the world. So Australia has had a zonal market for decades now. It's in most of the US. Norway, Sweden, Denmark, all the countries that have made the most progress towards homegrown energy have a zonal market. In terms of how it differs from what we have today we have a single national price for electricity, which means even if it costs lots of money to transport electricity from the south from the north, to the south in the form of more pylons, more wires cluttering up our countryside, that's what happens because there's no differentiation. Whereas in a zonal market, it will split the country up and make sure that the energy that's being produced locally is used locally, and that we actually slash the bill that keeps growing year on year, which is 400 million in the first 4 months of 2024, spent on turning down renewables, turning off wind turbines when it's windy, and turning up gas plants in the south of the country. that bill will essentially be gone from consumers' bills if we move to a zonal price system.
But the headlines which are telling us at the moment, Sarah, that, you know, if you live, for example, in the south, you will pay more. That's apparently based on what? Not living near the infrastructure. I mean, it's hardly your fault if you don't live near a pylon.
No, absolutely it's not. It's not your fault, but it also fails to reflect that different prices in different zones will be lower than the alternative of the same price all over the country.
So you might have it cheaper. So you might have a differential, but your bill would still be cheaper even if you're in the higher area.
Exactly. That's what most of the research says. I think Ofgem's own research a couple of years ago said the biggest difference might be £10 more a year in one zone than another. But at the moment, we actually already have a type of zonal pricing, or at least locational pricing, with the difference between the highest paying regions and the lowest paying regions at £130 a year for households.
And in terms of just the overarching problem with this extraordinary cost of energy, where the UK seems to be paying just an arm and a leg more than anywhere else on planet Earth, it seems. I mean, how do we just get that thing down? What's going on? I know it's sort of set by, I think there's a few urban myths around it, aren't there? But I think the fossil fuel price is what sets the energy bill, and it sets it at its kind of highest rate that day, or some. Have I got that loosely right?
Not that day, every single half hour.
Right, okay.
So that is true, but it's a symptom of a very inefficient system. We built the current market structures around a handful of coal and gas plants over 2 decades ago. It was never built to take account for consumers actively participating in the energy system, for local community energy projects to be popping up all over the country. That's the system we're moving to, and so we can't keep playing by the rules of the past. And zonal pricing will be one way to do that. Of course, it is incredibly controversial, and some of our members do not agree with it. But if you look at who is in favour of zonal pricing, you have the energy regulator, whose obviously job it is to protect consumer interests. You have the National Energy System Operator, which is a non-profit public body. And you have some of the most progressive energy suppliers in the country.
In terms of how we could get it cheaper in the meantime, though, just slightly away from zonal pricing in itself, just your take on this, Sarah. Couldn't Ed Miliband step in and say, the way we currently price energy is wrong and I'm going to change it? Is it not within his responsibilities or his gift to do that?
Well, this is a bit of a misnomer, because it's not any law or any policy, essentially, that says energy is priced this way. It's kind of almost the natural way markets work. If someone is selling something for £4, but I could sell it for £2, I'd be silly not to sell it for £4 because that's what I could get. It's more about how we empower consumers to be a part of the energy system, because at the moment, they're the ones getting the raw deal of this. Whereas they should be soaking up excess renewables, getting free energy when the wind is abundant. And then, when they're able to be flexible, when they're able to use heat and power and at different times, or charge a car at different times, they should get discounts for that.
So that you could, in the terms of the way it's priced, could you not say, OK, we're going to base it priced on the windmill or the solar panel? Would that not be, because, we're told that's much cheaper? People have arguments about that all day long, but would that not be the better way to price our energy rather than the filthy oil companies?
Well, then you get into kind of how you subsidise those plants, because what we have now is called marginal pricing. So it means if we need a few bits of gas to top us up at the end of the day, then yes, they set the price. But if we don't have those on the system, then those plants will just go offline. And that would raise security of supply concerns.
Somewhere along the line, everybody's just screaming out, Sarah, it's got to be cheaper. Do you foresee 5 years from now, I know you don't have a crystal ball, that we'll be sitting here having a conversation and we'll go, do you know what? It's half the price it was in 2025. Could that be a reality?
I think we certainly hope so, especially under the Clean Power 2030 mission. But the way to do that is to stop wasting the energy that we're creating in a homegrown fashion and start empowering consumers to use every last drop of it.
We've got a quick question here as well, Sarah, from Regil Point. He says, when is someone going to ask the question about the power providers starting to charge people who have solar panels for storing the electricity? It's happening in Australia. It's not going to be long before it starts here. Will someone raise this question, please? Sarah, you are that person, it seems.
Well, actually, they've done some amazing things in Australia because exactly to this writer's point, the system fell over because there was so much rooftop solar. And so now the governments there are encouraging people to install batteries with their solar, to get electric vehicles to soak up the solar that is on their roofs. So this is that kind of full circle energy economy we're moving towards, where every house is its own miniature energy system.
Yeah. And more seem to be doing that, but of course there is an outlay if you want to do it efficiently, I guess. This question came in from Tim, who says, I'm in construction. Can you ask Sarah if this is about zonal pricing? If the infrastructure failed in one zone that serves another, who pays the repair? Good question.
Well, as in the national grid, the actual physical infrastructure, so the wires, would still be owned by the same companies. It's not about the physical infrastructure being islanded or anything from one another within zones. It's simply about the way, it's about the electrons within the wires as opposed to the wires themselves.
Got it.
That's what's being bought and sold.
So would that responsibility fall to who then? To
That would be the same as it is today.
Okay.
If wires fail today, it's the distribution network operators and the national grid.
So like national highways look after the motorways, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Got it. Listen, Sarah, you've been great. Great to have you on. Thank you. Sarah Honan, who is Head of Policy at the Association for Decentralised Energy. I have to say, before we started the show today, the term zonal pricing, yesterday I was doing a podcast trying to talk about it. I didn't understand it. I read a bit more about it today. I didn't understand it. Now I've spoken to Sarah and we've had some questions come in. I still don't understand it. So maybe you do better than I. Nothing to do with Sarah, by the way. She explained it really well, but it does seem quite convoluted. The green entrepreneur Dale Vince, who often appears with us or Julia or Mike here on Talk, he is not in favour of zonal pricing, so that's an interesting take from his perspective. 0344 499 1000. Back with more of your calls in just a couple of moments. This is Talk.
I would argue some girl sitting there saying, I was really miserable and unhappy, but now I've cut my breasts off and now I'm pretending I'm a boy or non-binary, now I'm happy. I would consider that to be harmful content. Now, that's the stuff that's been promoted by a large number of the people, like the Peter Kyles and others, as helpful stuff.
This is where legislation should come in. And legislation isn't the answer to everything because it's always trying to play catch-up. You can't legislate against stopping kids from accessing stuff in their bedrooms. What you can do is turn around to social media companies and say, you must take greater responsibility.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. Welcome back. 0344 499 1000. So, it's the voice of doom. It's day 16. Is that right, Adam? I think it's day 16. Somebody here did send we had so many messages in today, an extraordinary amount of messages, but somebody did suggest that I should go to jail if we don't reveal who the voice of doom is. So, yeah, happy to do that, but maybe we'll get a winner today. So this is day 16, all right, of the mystery voice that has a political angle to it. That's the basic gist of it. It's the longest one of these has gone on for. We've been doing this for about 6 months. It's the longest it's gone on for. Nobody has managed to get the answer to this. Is it tricky? Yeah, it's probably a bit tricky, but no trickier than some of the ones that have gone on day one, so I don't quite understand that. Have a listen to the voice. The question is simple. Who is this?
Political decisions were taken.
Right, it's not David Cameron, OK? It is not David Cameron. It's not David Cameron! Every day, 22 people say, it's David Cameron. It's not David Cameron, nor is it Ian Duncan Smith, all right? I can tell you that much. Nor is it John Major. It doesn't sound anything like John Major, by the way. And it's not Angela Rayner, which a few people have put in just for cheap japes. Have a listen again.
Political decisions were taken.
Who is that? OK, remember, it's a political thing, this feature. It could be a politician, past or present. Could be somebody connected to politics. Oh, it's a politician, all right, I'll tell you that. It's a politician. Past or present, I'm not going to tell you so far. So you've got that clue, which I think you were on to anyway, but who is it? Don't, whatever you do, phone in, because we ain't got any prizes at this end. But you can message in if you fancy having a crack at it, 87222, and hopefully after the news at 3, we can reveal all if we get a correct answer. Here it is again.
Political decisions were taken.
And one more time with feeling.
Political decisions were taken. Political decisions were taken.
That's the kind of remix that we did with the Rocksteady crew. I know that it's going to be a winner. Thoughts on that one? If you get a right answer, we want it desperately. It's day 16. Somebody must know. Who is that person? 0344 499 1000 is the phone number for us doing the normal phone-in, not for this. Back to your calls. Oh, by the way, Margaret says, you've lost the plot, Ian. We'll never support Conservatives in any shape or form. No, I didn't say you should. I was merely asking the question of whether it's a good idea to have a merger. One in from George. No, no, no. Tories have no principles. If we want to save our country, then the Tories have to stand down. I will not hold my nose to the untrustworthy Tories, says George of Croydon. Isn't it interesting? We're talking about the most successful political party on planet Earth, all right, and one of the oldest as well. I think the oldest, possibly. Yeah, how weird is that? That they've really gone from, you know, the obvious hero to zero status. Certainly in the last 14 years, that journey seems to have finished them off, or has it? We might find out differently next week or come 2029. And Simon in Durham, no, I wouldn't support a pact between Reform and the Tories, even if this kept the terrible Labour government out. I do not trust the Conservatives one iota. Reform as a party, as a force, would be finished if they entered into an agreement. And some argue, Simon and others, you'll be aware of this, some argue they won't have a chance if they don't go into some kind of coalition. And one is that zonal pricing will cause people to move to cheaper zones, says Ian. Well, would you move house for a tenner a year? I mean, I don't know. You might do. But it could get that bad that people start doing it. This will be Charlie in East Sussex on zonal pricing. What are you thinking, Charlie? You're in that neck of the woods where you might be charged top dollar.
Well, I am, Ian. I live on the coast. It's not a very big town, so you can't really call it a massive area of high demand. We've got no real industry down there now, as you know, because you're from that part of the world. So my question is this. With this zonal pricing, would they say that Manchester or Liverpool or Birmingham would not be areas of high demand? Because this is what I'd like to know. It's a good point. Is it always the South? So when you're talking about zonal pricing, you might say, well, OK, Manchester, that consumes a lot of energy. So everybody in Manchester is going to pay more.
Yep.
Birmingham is going to pay more.
Yep.
Has he thought about it? Because these are obvious, to me anyway, Labour sort of heartlands, aren't they?
Well, yes.
So,
but apparently Ed Miliband, you'd have to assume, Charlie, even if you think Ed Miliband is a bit of a wilf, you'd have to assume that, you know, he's sought advice on this, and it happens in other parts of the world, and our last guest said quite successfully.
Well, I don't know whether he has actually thought it through, because I think lots of the policies that he comes up with and lots of the schemes he comes up with quite clearly have not been thought through rationally. And it's really, really worrying. So if you live in the South, we're paying more for everything anyway down here, even a pint of beer. We're paying for. I was in London the other week, nearly £9 for a pint of beer. Yeah. So, look, come on, let's get real. This zonal charging is never going to get off the ground. If it does, then we are in major trouble, Ian.
There it is. Charlie, thank you very much indeed. Succinctly put, are you a pro-zonal person, or are you very much against this idea that we could sort of zone it throughout the country? Simon's in Hampshire, also in the south, of course, so you might also stand to be one of the higher-priced regions. Simon, afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian. Yeah, nice to speak to you again. I basically echo Charlie, your last caller, and I'm, due to force of circumstance, I'm having to live in the south. I'm a low-grade civil servant with no prospect of furtherment because of my age. And why are they always picking on the South? Why do they seem to think that we have masses of money? I'm one of, as you term them, jammers. Every time something goes up, I have to, or my family has to do without something else.
Yeah.
And it seems to the point where, and even if I wanted to move, I cannot afford to move. So
yeah, so you're literally in the pincer movement. You're stuck there in the cul-de-sac, as it were.
Yeah, and as a civil servant, we don't get the pay increase that everybody seems to think we do. We're not the SCS, which is the senior civil servants who get all the nice benefits and the big handshake. We do our job. We work every day. With Border Force, and we carry on doing our job day and day, but we're getting hammered every single time in the South.
Don't you get $1 billion pension though as well, Simon? Isn't that the payoff? You can go to Barbados when you retire.
That would have been lovely. If I'd been in this country long enough to do that, then I would surely do it, but I haven't.
There it is, Simon. Thank you very much indeed for that. This comes in from Caroline. I think this is referenced I think there's a whole range of things here. Ian, like those who felt disillusioned rather than they couldn't be bothered to vote, there are also many people who feel disillusioned with the whole system rather than can't be bothered to work. This is a point I think I was making earlier on that I think Caroline is picking up on. The squeezed, just about managing lot, the jams that you described, see people milking the system every which way, from immigrants to in four-star hotels, to MPs who take freebies and people claiming their mobility car, to those earning 500 quid a time for selling their toenails on OnlyFans. Those hard workers with authenticity and integrity are starting to feel like mugs. Many feel defeated and have simply given up. That looks and feels like depression, so why not give up and get benefits? Yeah, I think it is that. It's like, why am I bothering with all of this? It seems crazy, and I can't improve my position either. I think that's the nub of the issue, isn't it? It's one thing being in that position, but if you think, well, don't worry, in a couple of years I'll be out of it and I'll be in a different place. If you really sense, tangibly, every part of you believes that there's no real prospect of ever improving it, then the disillusionment really does eat in. Coming up after the news, have we got a winner on the voice of doom? Remember, this is the voice you need to try and identify.
Political decisions were taken.
It's not David Cameron, it's not Ian Duncan Smith, it's not John Major or Angela Rayner. Who do you think it is? 87222. Hopefully we get an answer in a few moments. Right now, news time.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon, welcome back. It's coming up 3 minutes after 3 o'clock. Lots to come this afternoon. As you know, we've been talking about Farage issuing a brutal slapdown to Genric. His suggestion of a Tory-Reform Coalition to take down Labour. Mr Farage says his party would be revolted by the idea, and the Tories publicly say, we're not really in favour of it, might have to do it though. They're both saying that. Is it an inevitability? Would you support a Reform UK Tory Pact in some shape or form? We'll have more on that as well. Also this afternoon, Donald Trump is blaming Vladimir Zelensky for derailing peace talks with Russia, arguing Ukraine has no cards left to play and must accept that Crimea is lost. Are these the words of Trump or Putin? We'll talk to a man who really does know his beans on this one. Our ministers have pledged to clear the totally unacceptable backlog of driving tests by next summer, with some learners currently waiting a record 6 months for their practical exam. Can you think of a more precarious, wobbly, excitable moment than the driving test? And more so than, your GCSEs or A-levels. It's a driving test. Wow, the actual the day has come. And of course, the calculation you do in your head, if this works and I pass, my life changes. And it really does. 0344 499 1000. That's in the days when you could afford a car, let alone insuring one. Very quickly, the voice of doom. Have we got a winner? Remember, this is the voice you are charged with trying to identify.
Political decisions were taken.
Some of the answers: John McDonnell, Douglas Hume, Matt Hancock, Tim Farron, Steve Baker, no. Torsten Bell, no. Charlie Walker, it is not, nor is it Nick Clegg. Chris Phillip, Gavin Williamson, no. Dominic Cummings, no. Seb Coe, Aaron Banks, Robert Jenrick, no. Jacob Rees-Mogg, no. Jeffrey Howe, no. George Osborne, no. John Knott. Wasn't John Knott Margaret Thatcher's, was he a foreign secretary? Certainly an advisor. I think he was on the steps, wasn't he, during the big entry to Downing Street. No, it is not John Knott, which means we still don't have a winner. Day 17 of The Voice of Doom, with maybe some more clues tomorrow at 2:45. Now, Donald Trump has blamed President Zelensky for derailing his peace plan by refusing to accept the loss of Crimea. The US president said the Ukrainian president was prolonging the killing and warned Kyiv to accept US demands or risk a complete Russian takeover. These are extraordinary words from the American president. It comes as a deadly Russian missile struck Kyiv, killing at least 8 people and injuring dozens of others overnight. I think children were among those who died. Let's speak with Bill Browder, Putin's #1 foreign enemy, head of the global Magnitsky Justice Campaign. Bill, good afternoon to you. Nice to have you with us again. I almost had to read those words of Mr. Trump twice to confirm he really did say that. But there's what the White House are telling us, that this is all down to Zelensky. It's his fault, and he's warning him to accept whatever demands the US put in place. Otherwise, you'll be completely taken over by Russia. Good afternoon.
Not such a good afternoon listening to that. I mean, Trump has now shown what he really thinks. I mean, there was all this beating around the bush, all this dancing around the head of a pin, saying, he's got some 4-dimensional strategy for bringing an end to the war, and he doesn't. His only strategy is to basically try to bully the victim into capitulation, and that's what's going on here. There's no other way to characterize it, and there's no way to finesse it. There's no way to describe it in any other terms than it's just an abhorrent statement, and it's an abhorrent action that Donald Trump is taking in this conflict. And he's not trying to mediate the end of a war. He's trying to force the victim, Ukraine, to surrender to the aggressor, Vladimir Putin. And I don't see how anyone in the United States, anyone in Great Britain, anyone in the European Union can look at that as anything other than abhorrent.
What do you think's behind it? Because, maybe I'm giving Mr. Trump a huge benefit of the doubt here, and I'm perhaps going to continue the sort of 4D chess analogy by doing so. But there is a belief that there must be some thinking behind it, even if you fundamentally disagree with it. Is it about getting Russia on board so Russia become allies of the States rather than allies of China? Is it as crude as that, or is there something else going on?
Well, I think that would be the most generous explanation, is that he's got some kind of grand geostrategic vision. But Trump is not a guy who's subtle. He's not a guy who sort of holds back what he thinks. And if he has a grand geostrategic vision to separate Russia from China, he would be announcing that in every speech that he gives. He's not saying that ever. He doesn't have a geostrategic view. He just, for reasons that are inexplicable, he just decided against the U.S. national interest, against the interest of the United Kingdom, against the interest of the European Union and everybody else, to throw in his lot with Vladimir Putin against the Ukrainians, Vladimir Zelensky, and democracy in the free world. That's what he's done. And I mean, I have many friends that are Trump supporters, and they're just twisting themselves up into knots trying to justify what he's saying, and there's no way to justify it. It's unjustifiable what he's doing, and it doesn't fit into any generous explanation. There's no generous explanation that can say, well, we should just give up Ukraine to Putin for nothing. There's no way to explain that.
What is the ungenerous explanation then, Bill?
Well, so if you look at the American public opinion, about 90% of Americans think that Vladimir Putin is a villain. A majority of Americans think that the United States should continue to support Ukraine. That's the U.S. position. And of course, this position is even stronger when you get to Washington among his own Republican allies. The people in Congress are all very supportive of Putin, of Ukraine, other than a few crazies. And so he's not doing it because he thinks it's the politically right thing to do. He's doing it because he's got something going on which makes him think that it benefits him. Now, I don't want to get into wild speculation about what would benefit him, but he feels that there's some personal benefit to doing this, which he's ready to go down this road at the expense of just about everybody else. And that there was all this talk about Trump and Russia back in the day, and then after the special counsel Robert Mueller investigated, and he decided not to press charges. He found all sorts of interesting stuff, and anybody who's had the opportunity to read the Mueller report will know that there was all sorts of interactions between the Trump campaign and the Putin regime, but not enough to press charges. And so after Robert Mueller said no charges are going to be pressed, Trump ran around the world calling everything the Russian hoax. So that was the Russian hoax, that he had nothing to do with Russia. Well, here we are. He's now basically siding with Vladimir Putin and trying to force Ukraine to capitulate. I think we can't separate out what everyone was thinking back then and what's happening right now, and what the reasoning is, what the explanation is, I don't know. But all we can say is it's right in front of our face right now, and it's pretty awful to see.
Could it be as basic as Mr. Trump thinking, Russia are one of the big guys? I mean, economically, perhaps not so, but militarily and in terms of influence, etc., they are. Ukraine is a country that, a lot of people had never even heard of until half an hour ago. So they don't really matter to Donald Trump. It's some sort of Eastern European place. It's got a little fella who doesn't wear a suit running the place. It's costing a lot of money. A lot of American money went in there. Why are we bothering with that? Russia are the important ones here, and that's who I'm going to deal with. Is it as dismissive and as anti-intellectual as that might be? Could that be the answer?
Well, I mean, so then why is he so friendly with Saudi Arabia? Why are they so important? They're sort of nobodies other than the fact that they sell a bit of oil. I mean, who is Qatar? Qatar is a little country with some gas. I mean, I think he likes people that have a lot of money. Maybe he thinks some of that money is going to come his way. For the last 80 years, Russia has been the adversary of everybody, Russia and the Soviet Union. And so all of a sudden they become the friend. It just doesn't make any sense. And this is the same as trying to explain imposing tariffs on penguins or tariffs on the UK for that matter. None of it makes any sense. There's no way you can rationally explain all this stuff. He's got some angle that suits his interests, but it doesn't suit everybody else's.
Can you explain, Bill? There is an interesting, and it might be small in numbers, but there is a kind of sort of Putin fan base out there who see this story very much the other way around, that Zelensky is an impenetrable character. He could have had peace a few years ago, refused it. He's vainglorious. He's authoritarian. In Trump's words, he's a dictator. That kind of almost a Marjorie Taylor Greene. I know that's not the greatest name to add credibility to any debate, but you take my point. There is that view, and there are Brits that also serve that, adopt that view as well, Bill, who sense we've sort of been lied to. Actually, no, this is the other way around. Putin's done nothing wrong here. He was threatened by NATO from all angles for many, many years. He's been teased out of his own socks, and he's simply reacting to it. And, this isn't about good guy versus bad guy. This is an injustice, and in fact the story is very much the reverse of everything that most people have been told, and indeed the view that you have, Bill. You'll be familiar with that belief system, even if it isn't just Marjorie Taylor Greene. There are sane people out there who have that view.
I don't know anybody who has any sort of credibility that has that view. I mean, the facts are completely opposite. I mean, Vladimir Putin is a dictator. He's running a totalitarian regime in which anybody who says the slightest word against him is either imprisoned, exiled, or killed. And I've got quite a few friends who are no longer with us because they said bad things about Putin, including Alexei Navalny, Boris Nemtsov, the former leader of the opposition, and my lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky. All of them were killed by Vladimir Putin and his regime. He's a killer. He's a dictator. Nobody can say a word. And so for people to say that Zelensky is a dictator, it's absurd. And then to say that somehow NATO caused this whole thing, well, in the midst of this whole thing, 2 other countries on the border of Russia have just joined NATO. You have Finland and Sweden just joined NATO, and they weren't members of NATO before, but they are members now. Is he launching a war against Finland? Is he launching a war against Sweden? No, he's not. It's just complete made-up Kremlin propaganda, which continues to get repeated and there's not a lot of people who believe this stuff. It's extremely narrow point of view, and it's a Kremlin point of view. And if you were to probably get down to the bare bones, I would suspect that a number of people who are repeating these things are being paid to repeat them because it just doesn't make any sense. Either they're complete off their head ideologues or they're being paid by the Russians.
On a more optimistic note, Bill, just to finish on, we know that Mr. Trump can change his mind as often as most people change their socks. So, from going to calling Zelensky a dictator and then the next day saying, I didn't actually call him a dictator, even though it was literally filmed and everybody saw it. Despite that, and he's gone from saying, we've spoken on the phone now and it looks like, that row we had with JD, that's all in the past and, we can get a deal here. We've got a minerals thing going on and X, Y, Z. Very different feeling from the week before when this happened. This could change again, couldn't it? Could this be Trump simply throwing in another stick of dynamite saying, get this thing sorted, otherwise we're leaving?
Yeah, that's entirely possible. That's sort of his, quote, art of the deal that he does. I mean, I would say more likely, just based on what's going on, is it's been pretty obvious since his campaign that he was not going to support Ukraine anymore. And I think the most likely scenario is that the United States stops supporting Ukraine. And what happens then is that the remaining coalition of the willing continue to support Ukraine, and Ukraine doesn't surrender, doesn't capitulate, Putin doesn't succeed, and the war carries on. And it carries on in a way which may not be very pleasant, but it's a lot more pleasant for the Ukrainians and for us than Russia occupying Ukraine and then moving on Estonia or Poland. I think that's the more likely scenario, is that Putin doesn't get his way, that Trump doesn't get his way, and that Ukraine continues to be an independent, sovereign, non-Russian country. That's probably what will end up happening. But Trump is having his temper tantrum in the meantime because he can't force Ukraine to surrender.
Well, it's certainly not going to be dull in the next few weeks. Listen, Bill, I sense we will speak again on this. Thank you as ever for your time, sir. Bill Browder, known mostly as being Putin's #1 enemy, but he is head of the global Magnitsky Justice Campaign, which has changed laws and views around the world. I am going to come back, though, and I'm just going to throw this out to you. And I mentioned Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's what you would call, and this is not a pejorative, a pretty right-wing Republican. She takes no prisoners. She's a bit of a nana, but she's got, people like that kind of straight talker, even if they talk nonsense and rubbish, and she so often does. She's just mad. But she's also elected, and she has a view, and she's entitled to it. You don't have to like someone to understand they're entitled to it. It's not just her view, though. Whenever we talk about Putin, there is a body of thought out there in this country as well. That Putin is not the bad guy here. Zelensky is the bad guy here, even though his country was invaded by Putin. Now, I know that simplifies it. When I listen to Bill Browder, you would argue, well, you know, Marjorie Taylor Bradford on one side, Bill is equally as evangelical on his side. You could divvy it up like that. That's the kind of world we live in, this sort of crass polarity with very important things. And you go round in circles trying to work out, well, which one of these is true? The smart money seems to suggest, I don't think it's hard to get your head around, that Vladimir Putin is, I mean, we know he's not a very good bloke, OK? He's really not a good bloke. I don't even buy into he just looks after his own country. He has terrorised huge swathes of the population in his own country. The system that he runs is terrifying. Try being, you know, somebody who argues against the system in Russia. It ain't, you know, it's a squeak off North Korea, I get that, but nonetheless it's still biting at the heels of authoritarianism, if not full blown. So let's not run, even if you think Zelensky, and by the way, the Zelensky character really annoys me, by the way. He bugs the out of me. I don't like the jumper and the combats and all that. It's just a bit weird. You know, it's done, mate. I don't know what his experience is. I get all of that. But he is the guy that was elected. He's there. He's serving his time. And I don't think anyone on balance would say that in this situation, he is the bad guy. Can we not all agree on that? That Putin is a very bad man and has done a very bad thing. So what is it with the sort of odd support for Putin? Genuine question. Not criticising anyone. I'm just interested. 0344 499 1000. That is where we are. Lines open. We'll be back with more of your calls and on the Reform and the Tory Pact question as well. This is Talk.
I would argue some girl sitting there saying, I was really miserable and unhappy, but now I've cut my breasts off and now I'm pretending I'm a boy or non-binary, now I'm happy. I would consider that to be harmful content. Now, that's the stuff that's been promoted by a large number of the people, like the Peter Kyles and others, as helpful stuff.
This is where legislation should come in. And legislation isn't the answer to everything because it's always trying to play catch-up. You can't legislate against stopping kids from accessing stuff in their bedrooms, but what you can do is turn around to social media companies and say, you must take greater responsibility.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
James in Devon says, oh my God, has Trump ever looked at a map or a history book? He's a fool. Shall we go to Trump Towers, take it over and state it's now ours? Would Trump then say he's in the wrong for wanting to get his own property or territory back, says James, which sort of kind of simplifies the point, but in a good, it's not a criticism, in an obvious kind of way. Kenny in Edinburgh, I'm 46 years old. I bet the Tories will never get into power again in my lifetime. Reform do not need Tory votes to win because I reckon they'll get what they need directly from Labour supporters. The shops I go in, the pubs I have a pint in, the people that I hear talking at bus stops, and most importantly my own traditional Labour supporting family have got to the point now with Labour that it took 14 years for the Tories to get to. Reform will be the next government simply because it's simple. What's the alternative? I agree with every word of that from Kenny, everyone I speak to, and it's not just trades. I was talking to a couple of builders up my road recently who are doing a house down the road there. And we got into this conversation. You know, they listened to us here on Talk and they were, you know, discussing it's the, you know, that to them was a no-brainer. But it isn't just, you know, your average sort of working class tradespeople, you know, your core nitty-gritty working class people. It's much more than that, I'm sensing now. There's a disillusionment, not with just a specific policy, with the structure of the system. The difficulty that Reform will have, and it's the same difficulty anyone has, but I think Reform in particular, is turning around policy is like turning an oil tanker around. I'm talking about substantial. I mean, getting something into law is pretty darn difficult. I mean, we had a democratic vote on Brexit, for God's sake. It was quite unequivocal. It might have been close, but it was unequivocal. There was no doubt about the vote. And that took how many years of toing and froing? So getting to have structural change, I mean, seismic change to your system, the way we do business, the way the civil service responds to us doing business, is not the work of probably one term in government. And the problem that Reform could have if they formed a government is that it could look every bit like they're not doing what they said they were going to do. And Trump's getting a bit of this at the moment. Well, you said you're going to do, well, is it really? Tariffs, cars, jobs, inflation, man alive. How's it going, Donald? There's a little bit of that. You've got Republicans who are being, you know, who are very still supporters, but it's waning a little bit. So that might be the problem, that the system wins despite Reform's best intentions. Craig is in Oxford on the coalition possibility. Craig, what have you got for us? Good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon. If I may dip a toe into what you were talking about before the break as well.
Yes.
And just throw something out there that if Russia, North Korea and China formed a political union 70 years ago that evolved into a military coalition and then started recruiting countries across from the east all the way across and got onto the borders of Germany and France, I think we might be getting a bit antsy as well. Not saying that Putin's a good guy. I'm just throwing it out there that that's effectively what the EU have done with NATO, and we've crept further and further east. And
that seems to
be there.
Yeah, that seems to be the criticism, doesn't it? That it's that is central to it. But then I suppose the counter would be, well, you know, when you've got Russia on your doorstep, as these countries do, then, you know, you have to make sure you've got a defence mechanism in place.
Exactly. And all I'm saying is that if you put the shoe on the other foot and see what we've done, maybe we might get a little antsy and start pushing back a little as well.
True, but it would be fair to say, wouldn't it? There's a big difference between inviting Finland to join NATO and China being your ally.
Yeah, I'm not saying that any union they formed would be even remotely close to the union that the West has formed.
No, I get it. I get what you're saying.
It's just throwing a counter argument.
And I did put that to Bill Browder as well. That, you know, that is Putin's position. Hang on a second. You know, wherever I look, it's like a wall of mirrors with NATO written on every mirror.
Yeah, but anyway, back to the more pressing matter at hand.
Indeed.
I think anyone that claims a coalition between Reform and the Tories is going to help protect the right vote is a deluded Tory voter or Conservative MP. They've completely betrayed the British people for the last 14 and a half years, or when they were in power. And if Reform did step a candidate down in my area, I don't know anyone that would say, oh, well, I'll vote for the Tories then. Yeah. Because we all still remember them lining their own pockets, the COVID fast track stuff where all their mates got rich from the government purse. There was no duck house that got painted under expenses, nonsense. We just fed up to the back teeth of them.
Literally that.
Yeah, there's absolutely no way that anyone I know would vote for the Tories again. And this is the problem. It's for the birds if they think, oh, yeah, we can. They're a second best choice because they're dead. Effectively.
Do you think mainstream politics is kind of dying, though? I mean, and not just the Tories, but, you know, other major parties where this kind of... I often use this word groupthink, Craig, but I think it sort of applies, really, where they've sort of... You know, they'll do a bit. It's sort of unthinkable they would tinker with the World Health Organization, for example. They'll just leave that there. They wouldn't mess around with policing too much. They'll leave that there. Or the College of Policing and things like non-crime, hate crime. You know, that's not for the government to get involved in. They have sort of deferred things elsewhere and forgotten the central role is to govern in the interest of the people.
Well, I don't think they're interested in the interest of the people. That's the problem with the Conservatives and Labour. I mean, I very frequently refer to the World Economic Forum as Spectre. You know, they are a bunch of supervillains incarnate. The World Health Organization, for all the good they do, I don't trust a lot of the stuff that they seem to be wanting to get involved in, talking about mandatory vaccines and this, that, and the other. We've got I think we've got two world viewing or two focus on looking out into the world when our back garden's getting overrun and the country's going to pot. Yet we're still just ploughing on down this route that globally we need to get better. I mean, yesterday you were talking about the GB Energy saying that they can't use slave labour for making solar panels and this, and the wind turbines. And again, we seem to defer everything, carbon offsetting and all the nonsense that they've put us through and put our taxes up, say, oh, we're not going to do this, and then they outsource it. And they're all at it. Australia are doing the same with coal. They're selling it to China. It's just mental that what's going on. And unfortunately, we've got a load of unqualified, over ambitious, you know, generally posh numpties running the country and calling the shots for too long. And I'd much rather live in a country run by engineers and doctors and problem solvers and people that can think and come up with solutions, and not, you know, monotone dimwits that are reading off an auto cue with zero emotion.
Yes, and there's a lot of those. Yeah, here's another press release. Read from that minister. You know, we get too much of it. Listen, Craig, I've got to shift, but thank you. Craig in Oxford. I can hear a lot of desperation in many of the calls and comments. Desperation of what is seen by many as sort of demise of our country. You know, surely there's a better way. It is that, and it's never been. I've never lived in a time where that feeling is more pronounced than it is today. I know not everybody feels that, but I think those that are engaged in kind of the bigger conversations, that's us here, you listening to this, who bother to read up on what's happening and care about what's happening. I think I probably speak for everyone. We've never really lived in it. We're in a weird epoch of kind of confusion and just that sense of exasperation. What the hell is going on? I'm as mad as hell, I'm not going to take it anymore. It's all of that, yeah? 0344 499 1000. We're going to talk driving tests in a moment. Are you waiting for a driving test? Is one of your kids on that big, old, never-ending waiting list to get their driving test? I remember how exciting that was as a kid. 17, going to get my driving license, going to change my life. I can drive places. I can do stuff. I can go around the town centre and people will look at me with my furry dice and me go faster stripes. All of that has come to a bit of a halt because the backlog is still there. They reckon it's going to be cleared by summer 2026. What is the reality? What's gone on? Details on the way. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It's 25 to 4. Now, the Transport Secretary has pledged to clear what she's branded the totally unacceptable backlog of driving tests. She's going to clear this by next summer. This is Heidi Alexander, of course, said 10,000 extra test slots will be made available each month from May. Some learner drivers are currently waiting a record 6 months for their practical exam. Let's speak, in a moment we're going to speak to Kev Field, who's a co-founder of Confident Drivers, a real driving instructor, yes. First, our friend Ben Clapworthy, travel correspondent over there at The Times. Afternoon to you, Ben. I mean, I said at the beginning, I mean, it is worth just having a little reminiscing moment here. I mean, the driving, how seismic is that when you're about 17, when you think, I'm going to have wheels, I'm going to have mobility? I mean, it's a massive part of your life, isn't it?
Oh, totally. I remember learning at school, and there was sort of a race to see who would be the first to pass their test, and who was, and then they did, and then you'd see them outside the school taking their friends off, and it was sort of you were waiting for your friends to have passed or for you to pass. It was so exciting, and it really did transform people's lives. I remember the day I grew up in Bristol. You know, you either took the bus or you walked, or you could drive a car. And when you drove a car, it was amazing. I immediately thought I'd take my friend off to Bath the day after passing, because it was somewhere, you know, it felt long enough away that it was a journey. Immediately got to Bath and drove down a bus lane and got a fine through the post a week later.
Really? I literally had a slight prang on my, I think, first day driving. It wasn't my fault, but a driver kind of loosely bumped. It wasn't much damage, but it killed me at the time. I think my lovely wheel arch had suddenly taken a dent. But it's a big moment, and of course even then, you know, we're slightly different ages, but you know, in all eras there's always a point when you wait a bit for your test. You know that you're not going to get it tomorrow or next week, so it was always frustrating to go, oh, you know, it's not going to be for another 6 weeks or something, but it came around quickly, and then you took your test. But this is a totally different stratosphere of waiting time.
Well, yeah, I mean, I remember when I booked my test, as you say, you knew it wasn't going to be tomorrow. My driving instructor said now would be a good time to think about booking the test. Went home, went on the government website, looked, there were slots, picked one. I think it was at the start of the Easter school holidays, booked it and didn't think anything of it until the day of the test. And now speaking to learner drivers, and you really sense their frustration, that they get up at 6 a.m. in the morning on a Monday to try and get tests. There were people posting screenshots the other week. They were 16,000th in the queue, and then they find that there's no tests at any test centre at all. Some of them travelling hundreds of miles in order to get tests, and then many are forced to use effectively bots and apps and so on, that they register on the app to try and get a cancellation slot, and the bots book up the slots, and it's so complicated, and it really, you just feel sorry for people who, many of them are wanting to drive for the freedom, but also for jobs, for apprenticeships, for college, and so on, and that freedom is being taken away by not a system of saying to them, well, you're necessarily going to wait 6 months, but actually you may find that you can't even get a test at all. Yeah, and there's the trouble. Thankfully, there is a knight in shining armour called Heidi Alexander. She's I nearly said the travel correspondent. She is the Transport Secretary. She said, look, 10,000 extra slots, test slots will be made available each month from May. Now, that's a great headline, but you haven't got to be in her job to work out, hang on, what are the practicalities of that? Because I would imagine that's quite involved, and it would take a lot of work and a lot of personnel to make this happen. Well, what I noticed in the announcement yesterday is that there's a lot of sort of, we will sort of invite people, backroom staff who can do frontline examining, to come forward and return to the front line effectively to carry out tests. They're also putting overtime incentives in for examiners. There's also a recruitment process, but that is obviously going to take longer. Will I be pleased to see 10,000 extra test slots? Yes. Will I think that that immediately will make a difference? No, I don't. Do I think they'll make the deadline next year? I don't know. But one of the strange things, and Ruth Cadbury, the Labour MP, who is chair of the Transport Select Committee, said the other week that one of the crazy things is these bots, the reselling of tests. And her example was, if the Evis family can clamp down on ticket sales for Glastonbury Festival, and you know, there are a lot of people that don't get tickets for that, but there are a finite number. they are non-transferable, they have a way of doing it. Why is it that a government website has such woefully outdated technology that it's impossible for them to actually control who's accessing their website and who's buying up the slots?
What are they using? Windows 95 over there at the Department of Transport?
Would it surprise you?
No, it wouldn't. And isn't it interesting? You know this from your work as a journalist. Every time I hear this story and I make the Windows 95 gag, somebody, senior in politics goes, yeah, that is actually what we are using.
Outdated.
Or something very similar to that. You have this idea of this nice, shiny infrastructure that's all digital and geared up, ready to go, but it really is creaking.
Well, I always use the example of the NHS computer system and trying to digitalise files in that and the nightmare that it was there, and it seems very similar. They say that sort of gov.uk is a one-stop shop for everything, and strangely enough, if you go on to try and pay your self-assessment tax, it works. But if you go on and try and...
Always works for that, doesn't it?
If you go on and try and go onto the DVLA website, very quickly you do find that you get into what look like pages that, the old BBC News website. Sometimes you'll find a very old article and it looks, and you're like, crikey, that's how it looks.
It looks like from 1972, doesn't it? When you see it, you go, wow, that's what a website used to look like.
And you still get that on some government websites. And it doesn't, as I say, does it surprise you? It doesn't me.
But is it going in the right direction, though? I mean, that's, I suppose, the only good news we can hope for, that this is a scintilla of light at the end of the tunnel, just to add the transport analogies in there, for those wanting to take a test, because it is frustrating, and waiting 6 months is a pain.
If the 10,000 extra tests come, and that is every single month, then that will ease some of the demand issues. Very basic economics. Supply at the moment is massively too low compared to demand. Then you get the industries around it, the bots, the reselling. There's been even cases of fraud within the DVSA that administer driving tests, with people at their head office knowing when tests are, selling them, and so on. So when there's that sort of demand imbalance, you're going to get that problem. If you have 10,000 new tests, 20,000 over a couple of months, that is going to be really positive. Let's hope for next year, because we've done a lot on this, and speaking to learner drivers, I just feel really sorry for them, because they just want to pass their test, and they, lots of them have asked me, well, when did you pass and what was it like? And it is that thing of, it was, as I said at the minute ago, it was just go on, buy a test and wait for the day and hope you pass.
And I suppose the other manifestation, I hadn't really thought about this till now, we'll ask Kev about this in a second, the driving instructor, but if you pass, if you have your lessons and you've booked, I don't know, 20, whatever it happens to be, and you've got your 20, they go, right, now's the time to put in for your test, and it's 6 months away. I mean, what do you might need a few refreshers in that time as well. You might have forgotten how to drive.
Absolutely, and again, it's one of those classic examples that people say, well, parents can take you out and so on. Well, yes, if you're fortunate enough to have a car that you're able to use and so on. So there's that issue as well. One of the things they say as well is that the actual pass rate is falling, because instructors know that there's these huge wait times, and Kev will be able to talk better to this, but they obviously advise people to book tests earlier, and then you do get students who are basically not ready, but you're not going to give up that precious
slot. You're going to give it a go.
Yep.
Listen, Ben, good to see you again. Thank you. Ben Clapworthy, travel correspondent over there at The Times. Thank you to him. Let's speak with Kev Field, co-founder of Confident Drivers. Kev, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian. How are you?
Yeah, good as gold. It's nice to have you with us. I mean, just on that last point that I was chatting to Ben about there, I mean, you are, I'm sure somebody who experiences this all the time, that you've taken a learner driver through their paces, they're ready to put in for the test, and lo and behold, it's 9 months away or something, and you think, wow, hang on, you're going to need a load more lessons between now and then. I know that's an exaggerated kind of inversion of events, but it's not far off.
I think you basically hit the nail on the head, because people are starting lessons. They pass their theory after they've started their lessons, and then now what they're doing is booking a test. They see it's a long way off. Driving lessons aren't that cheap anymore, and they just can't afford to carry on driving. And some people haven't got the privilege of having a private car that they can use. So again, they're stopping lessons and then trying to start again. They're not putting their test back because they would lose that slot. So again, it's a catch-22 for most learners, and I feel really sorry for them at the moment, where they're planning, and then all of a sudden it just goes wrong.
Yeah. What is the average cost of a lesson these days, by the way? I was just talking to Ben about that. He said he paid 20 quid in I think 2009 or something. I'm assuming it's a bit more than that now.
It's slightly more. I think you're talking anywhere between 35 and 50, depending on where you live in the country.
So that's made me feel rather old, because it was about a tenner, I think, a lesson when...
I think mine was £9.
Well, there you go. So there's only a year between us. That's when good old British School of Motoring were around. Are they still about? I don't know, but they were back.
Yes, they're still around. Yeah. They're still going.
Yeah, they tried to sell me an awful lot of lessons. I remember that much. But nonetheless, it's different times now for lots of reasons. And of course, you see the frustration on learner drivers, because it is a big thing, isn't it? You know, learning to drive is not just about the practicalities of owning a car. It's a symbol of the fact that you've moved sort of into adulthood. It gives you your mobility. It might be good for work. You might live in a place where you haven't got great public transport. I mean, it ticks so many boxes.
Yeah, it's a life skill. Yeah. It's not just driving a car. It is a life skill, and it affects not just yourself. It could affect your parents, other people as well. And you mentioned job as well. You know, some people are relying on taking tests to get a job, get a better job where it's better paid, or, you know, so you are affecting people's lives with a waiting time. Yes, you can plan for it, and you can, you know, but there is so much pressure when it actually comes to test day as well. Because, you know, if you're taking that test and something unfortunate happens, you know, you fail, you've got to wait another 24 weeks, which more or less 6 months, to take another test. Yeah. Well, that's if you can book one when, you know, the day after you failed. So
of course,
there is this added pressure now.
Yeah, and what do you say to the government or what's your response to the government in this respect, Kev? Because Heidi Alexander, the Transport Secretary, has said they're going to put 10,000 extra test slots in place, made available each month from May. And again, you know, this isn't a world that, you know, I've never oddly worked at the Department for Transport, but I can only imagine that isn't without its challenges.
Yeah, I've got to say it's a great idea. And if it happens, fantastic. But it's not going to be cured in a year. You know, it's going to take longer. The amount of people that I know that have stopped driving, that will see this news come through and say, right, I want to start driving again. So the amount of number of people looking for tests is going to go up because people have stopped driving. So I think it's going to go on for a lot longer than the 2026, which is quoted. I just can't see 10,000 tests a month would be good enough.
Yeah, maybe we need more driving instructors.
I think there's a possibility that potentially driving instructors that are well trained that could potentially step in to do assessments. But again, maybe that's something we need to bring up with the government with that as well.
Indeed. Listen, Kev, great to have you on. Good luck with everything. Thank you for being with us. Kev Heale, co-founder of Confident Drivers, here on the programme. I can only imagine the frustration if you are waiting. I mean, every now and again, somebody will luck in. They just go to the website, book their test, and bang, it's there. You couldn't believe it. Like, I've got it in 2 weeks' time. But that isn't the common response. And it is really important. And anyone that's gone through it knows, if you look back or think back to, not everybody did it when they were 17 or 18. Some people did wait until they were a little bit older. Some people never did it. My mum never took a driving test. She didn't want to do it. Never drove in her entire life, which I find extraordinary. But there are people. I was talking to somebody quite recently. You know, full-grown adult, never driven, never even really thought, never had any need to, never wanted to either. But it is a big moment, and you know, if you pass, I mean, if you don't pass it, of course, you know, whether you pass first time, second time, etc. It's a choking moment when you fail your driving test. It's like, oh, because you had it all in your head, because you might have bought your first car, it might be ready to go, it's sat there on the driveway, you've only ever been out with it with a, you know, either a mate, mum or dad or whatever, on your provisional licence, but when you're making the plans, aren't you, on the day of the driving test? God, if I pass, I'll be out in the car, literally driving a car on my own tonight. Or you could do what my cousin did on her driving test while going around the town centre in Scunthorpe, saw a friend walking along the path, honked the horn and waved at her. That was a fail, surprisingly enough. She said, well, it was just polite, wasn't it? Yeah, I suppose it was polite, but you failed your test. 0344 499 1000. More from you on the way. This is Talk.
So with this virtual non-existent army and the Ukrainians with volunteer units effectively fought the Russians to a standstill on the Eastern Front in Donbass, they simply were not capable of fighting a war on both fronts. There was nothing they could do about Crimea. But I can tell anybody listening to this, having lived among Ukrainians for 2 years and indeed worked at the heart of the Ukrainian government, that Crimea is absolutely existential.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. It's 10 to 4. Peter Cardwell's going to be here at 4 o'clock on Drive. Look forward to that. He'll be in to tell us what is going on in a few moments. Graham is in Leicester on driving lessons. How you doing, Graham?
Hi, Ian. Good, are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. Yeah, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, my two twins at 19, they passed the test about just over 12 months ago, and one of them had to take a retest, and she used one of them apps, and it worked quite well. It only charged her about £26. And they took her test and got her one that was about a month or 6 weeks away, yeah.
Right, so these are companies that obviously specialise in saying we can get you a quicker slot.
Yeah, it's just on the app. But what I wrong about was I know two people who in the last 6 months who are on this independency payments. These basically, there's nothing wrong with them, but they both ended up with brand new cars. Neither of them could drive, and the government managed to put them through the test in less than just over 2 months.
Wow. That's the way to do it, right?
We've obviously got a two-tier driving system.
Two-tier Kia, it is, yes, indeed. No fear, two-tier Kia is here.
It'd be interesting to put an FOI request in to see how many of these people are passing the test and what the average timescales are, because they've certainly got faster access to it than the general public.
I wonder if you get a Kia car after you've passed.
Probably, yeah.
Maybe.
Well, he's running around in a nice big fancy Vauxhall estate, one of them now. You know what I mean?
Vauxhall estate, I love it. Graham, it's comical indeed. Thank you, Graham. Love that. Thanks, Graham in Leicester. This is Norman, who's in good old Dartford. How you doing, Norman?
I'm very well, thank you, Ian.
Good. What are you thinking?
Going back to the Tobias Ellwood.
Yes.
I've got to say, up until the last election, I voted Tory for the best part of 60 years.
Yep.
They've learnt nothing, the Tories. I listened to him and I thought, you've learnt nothing, mate. Absolutely nothing. Why? People will never trust them.
Wouldn't it have been great, Norman, if Tobias Ellwood had come on, rather than sounding like, I'm not saying he sounded like he was reading from a script, but the kind of like very empty kind of nothingness. If he'd have gone, do you know what, guys? We royally messed up. We got it so wrong in so many areas. We didn't listen to people. We should have been right on it, whether it's woke stuff, whether it's net zero, immigration. We really need to change up our game, change our game. Wouldn't you have loved to have heard him say that? Because you might have gone, do you know what? What a nice bit of honesty from Tobias.
Well, yeah, but what he really said was, you know, we did nothing wrong. You know, this immigration thing.
Yeah.
It wasn't until they started to publish the legal immigration that people realised how many people were coming into the country.
Yeah.
The whole thing was about the boats. And then you find you've got 750,000 people coming in legally.
Well, in a weird way, the boats are the least of the problem.
Right.
I mean, they're a bigger problem for other reasons, but in terms of numbers, the bigger problem is the legal stuff, the stuff that's been given the green light by the government.
Well, that's what shook me in. Till I realised what had gone on. And time after time I voted for them and they said, we will cut immigration. And then you find out what they've hidden. Because they weren't published, Ian.
No, it took a long time before we got that level of traffic. Do you remember David Cameron said, I'm going to get it down to the tens of thousands?
That's right.
From the hundreds of thousands. Never ever happened. It only went up and it continued going up. And they always say, well, most of them are students. Well, some of them are students. That's fine. They're paying for their education. And if they return back to their country afterwards, I haven't got a problem with that. It's a big business for us. But it's the other area that I think, are we not able to fill these jobs ourselves? I mean, seriously? And they're not all brain surgeons coming over.
I heard on Julie Show this morning, an ex-Labour Party spokesperson. Well, I'll be honest with you, there's no hope. He was saying about how the younger people, you know, they shouldn't be made to go to work.
Right, that's a great way to.
What I love it is, you know, and I thought, well, how the world has changed. When I was growing up, I must admit, my dad died. It's only me and my mum.
Yeah.
And my mum said to me, "You want anything out of life, Norman? You've got to work for it."
And she was bang on.
What an attitude.
Yeah, she was bang on. It wasn't even a point of debate, was it? She was absolutely spot on. Listen, Norman, thank you, mate, for that. A great bit of very simple advice from your mum as well. Norman in Dartford. Thank you to him. He gets the final word from us, but it continues with aplomb because Peter Cardwell is here on the other side of the news at 4 o'clock. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian. How are you?
I'm good, yeah.
Glad to hear it.
Here? What's going on?
Something really strange has happened. It's
Really?
I think Mulder and Scully should be brought in. Unexplained paranormal phenomena. The Liberal Democrats have come up with a policy that I really agree with and think is an excellent idea.
I felt I was in a Charlie Brooker Black Mirror episode.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, I feel your pain.
No, this isn't right. This isn't right. Something's happened. Someone has shifted the parameters of reality here.
Yeah.
Because I'm going, hang on, Ed Davey, as Julia said, the fact that it wasn't announced while coming down a water slide in Rhyl and landing on a rocking horse or something makes me wonder whether it's true or not.
No,
but
it is true.
True.
I was speaking to the Lib Dems today, and I really want to talk to them. I really want to say, well done on this really good idea to fine people, to make antisocial behaviour kind of fines for people playing music on public transport. Now, not everybody takes public transport, but I do, and lots of our viewers and listeners do, and they have the sense to put a pair of headphones in or a pair of wireless earphones. You can afford 200 quid for a phone, you can afford 20 quid. That was my wireless earphones.
That's the bit that I wonder about.
$18.99 or something.
I mean, there's two things I worry about on that. I wonder about on that. Firstly, you know, you're right. If you're of that age, I mean, it's not always age dependent, but if you're younger and you're playing anything, firstly, you've probably got headphones. That would be unthinkable. And secondly, the quality of what you're listening to is infinitely better in the headphones than on some tinny speaker on your Samsung.
Well, there was a guy the other day who was playing like a really loud game on his phone, and I'm just like, can you not just see that people around you don't want to listen to your phone? So we'll be talking about that. We'll be talking about 500,000 shoplifting offences recorded by police for the first time, millions of vapes seized in illegal crackdowns, lots of crime stories around today. We'll be talking about what Trump is saying on Ukraine and the fact that a think tank is saying let in skilled Russians. Let's take all the liberal Russians into this country. Very interesting policy. Not sure I agree with it. From the Henry Jackson Society, we'll talk about that. The headphone dodgers we will discuss, as I said, and a sports update as well. Also, Nigel Farage vowing to create a minister for deportations to boot out foreign criminals. And Harry and Meghan